o'clock, so we'll get going. All right, thank you. I'd like to reconvene this meeting, and I'd like to welcome you to the Coeur d'Alene School District Board meeting for October 5th, 2020. Would the gentlemen please remove their hats, and everyone let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, again, thank you for being with us today, either in person or online. My name is Casey Morstro. I'm the board chair. I'll be conducting today's meeting. Before we get going, I just want to introduce the participants up front here. So starting at my far right is Miss Rebecca Smith and Miss Lisa May, both board members. Seated behind them is Lynn Town, our board clerk. And to my left is Jennifer Brumley. She's our vice chair. Miss Tambra Pickford, who's a board member, was unable to join us tonight. And then over to my far left is Dr. Steve Cook, our superintendent. Public comment on district-related items is scheduled near the start of the meeting. Please sign in on the sheet provided at the entrance door. Because of the diversity of issues, members of the board will not respond to public comment made during tonight's meeting. Instead, issues may be recorded and referred to the proper staff person for follow-up. Comments may also be submitted to the board in writing through the clerk. Okay, is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the agenda is approved. And Dr. Cook, I'll turn it over to you for our board recognitions for tonight.
All right, I'm going to try to double fist this here on a mic. Okay, we're going to recognize some of our key players that really got us through some really difficult times this summer, this spring, and so far this fall. So I'm very excited. I'm going to ask, first we're going to start with our nutrition services team. So I'm going to ask Ed to come up and receive an award first on behalf of the group, and then I'm going to hand him a mic and let him recognize some folks individually. So Ed, if you don't mind, come on up here. Stand right there. And I'm going to hand you this. From the Coeur d'Alene Public Schools Board of Trustees, the Excellence Award, presented to our nutrition services team in recognition of our ability to adapt and create multiple food distribution networks to ensure all students had access to meals this past spring, summer, and so far this fall of 2020. So let's give Ed a hand as a representative for this. And before I have him bring up his team, I would just like Ed to take a second to talk about how much work went into, like, I don't even want to tell you, you guys know the ask that we put on these guys, and it was completely unreasonable, completely unrealistic, and an impossible lift, and guess how well they did it? They did it without fail, and I am just so proud of that work that they've done. So Ed, how?
Well, we started out under-promising and over-delivering. So we started out just serving lunch, and then we did that for a few days, and then we'd add breakfast, and then we'd add locations, and then we'd add buses, and we did all of that. And that's how we ended up doing it, just looking at how we're doing it. And it couldn't have happened without our team. You know, our team is really behind the scenes. So in our office over on Best Avenue, we get all the finance, we order all the product, we do a lot of training, we deliver all the food, and it's just amazing how we can end up doing that. So by doing it that way, all our team was on board. And really what we want to do is thank not only you, but the board member for allowing our team, to get paid during this, the springtime to be able to do that, because that helped. And so we're everywhere. And so we're continuing now. We're starting to deliver in the classrooms, and we're doing anything that really needs. And so we couldn't have done that without, support of you and support of Jeff, to be able to do that, to make that happen.
So let's get some folks up here and let's give them some awards in doing this. Okay, I'm going to hand these over to Ed, and he's going to present them. Do you want me to help hand it to you one by one?
Whoa, this goes to Ed Dukar.
Congrats, Ed.
Well, thank you. Okay, Kelsey Blair. Come on up, Kelsey. So, Kelsey, yeah, stay up here because we're probably going to get a photo a little bit, 6 feet apart, Kelsey is our area manager. She does all the menus and training, and she's a key member, and she's new to our team this year. Laura Corbin. Laura does all our finances and free and reduced applications, and keeps me in check. And then we have Allison Modine. Allison come on up, Allison. Allison does the ordering and everything behind the scenes. So these are, behind the scenes, and right now we're behind the masks.
Oh, he's been waiting all week to do that one, I'm telling you right now. Let's give one more round of applause for everybody up here. Scott, can we get a picture? All right, I'm going to ask Jeff Voller to step up. On behalf of the Coeur d'Alene Public Schools Board of Trustees, we are awarding you this Excellence Award presented to the Maintenance, Grounds, and Custodial Team in recognition of your ability to manage unique and challenging demands while performing at a high level to meet the needs of our schools in reopening in 2020. We salute your dedication, your commitment to service, and attention to detail. And Jeff, first of all, let's give him a round of applause. Okay. And I would just say that, once again, almost the exact same words. What we asked people to do this summer was very unreasonable, unrealistic, and almost impossible to pull off. And you know what? We did it across the district, and we just made a category change in which it sounds like it ought to be pretty easy. We have half the kids going 1 week. Let's just make all the kids go the next week. And guess what happens with that? The logistical decisions and the discussions that have to happen to get all those kids here, to have a safe place for them to sit when they get here, all of those things take time, effort, and manpower and woman power. And Jeff's team has done that with commitment, dedication, and with absolutely no need for accolades for doing that. And I would say that that's the most important part about what his squad has done and how they have taken on this work. And I am so grateful for that commitment and the willingness for people to just take that on and do that kind of work without the kind of forward-facing recognition. So Jeff, thank you to your team. Thank you for your folks showing up. Let's give out some awards.
So Michael Westrup, come on up. Okay, Michael Westrup, Director of Maintenance and Facilities. And really this award is for your team, and I want you to hang that in the office at your maintenance headquarters as well. And so really this goes to say that there are a lot of people under these people that we're going to honor tonight too that made all of this happen, both with the nutrition services team and with the custodial and maintenance team. It really takes all of us to get this done. All of us are being asked to do some things that are way outside the box of what we've ever been asked to do. And with all the projects and with all the different things that we asked these teams to do over the summer, it's been really important to have the support. And I'm actually really thankful that my team members still take my phone calls when I call and ask them to do something different. Kevin Jennings, maintenance foreman. Bob Harvey, custodial foreman. Adam Wilson, grounds foreman. And Becky Camerata, the main boss, the one who actually makes everything happen.
Scott, maybe we can get a picture. But on behalf of the school district, the community, and the school board trustees, I want to thank you all for going so far above and beyond the call and getting us through what we can say, I think, honestly, is a 1 in 100 years global pandemic. And we're not done yet, but thank you for all you're doing to get us there. So one more round of applause for him. Scott, can you? And that's it for board recognitions for today. We'll do, technology has been planned for next month.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Cook, and thank you to all those folks for coming down, allowing us to recognize them. As you said, just an excellent job all around. As Dr. Cook mentioned, we had technology on the agenda, and we're going to catch up with them in the future. Okay, next up is board comments, and we had one submitted in, Ms. Smith, that you just wanted to bring up, so I will turn it to you.
Yeah, and I brought this up a couple of weeks ago, and so I'm curious tonight as to the board interest in maybe going to Dr. Cook and his team and having them bring back some options, maybe for us, for the lower elementary school students. If we were to move back to an orange learning stage, I'm curious to know if they might have some options for us that might include keeping some of those younger students in the classroom. We've had a lot of feedback from patrons as to just the difficulty, especially at the lower ages, of being in remote learning. So I'm just curious if that would be something we'd want to ask Dr. Cook and his team, just to bring back options as far as what that could look like and what the difficulties and what the challenges and what the benefits of doing that might be. So.
Okay, thank you for mentioning that. It's a comment item, not a discussion item, so I just want to be careful we don't have a bunch of discussion around it. But as you recall, Ms. Smith brought that up. She mentioned, I believe at our last monthly board meeting, or maybe it was one of our weeklies, Monday weeklies that we've done. And so she wanted to bring that back just to see our comfort level as a board with that, and if that's something we'd like to explore and have Dr. Cook and his team bring back to us. Probably some pluses and minuses, and what are the opportunities and the heartaches.
Maybe
of
what that would look like.
Yeah.
You know, what could that look like if it was all K-5, maybe if it was just K-3, what are the challenges, and what could a change in what our reopening plan look like regarding that?
And just to clarify, your comments would be, how can we keep those younger grades in a 5-day a week, or
Yeah,
something
even if we
similar to that
moved,
in a
even if we moved to orange,
situation?
how could we keep our younger kids maybe in the classroom, included by social distancing? Is that something that could still happen? What are some different things that maybe we didn't anticipate looking like as we walk through COVID, as we walk through this, plans change. I mean, we've seen that across the country. Maybe it's time just to relook at our plan and say, hey, here's what we know now that we've been doing it, and here's some adjustments that could be made kind of going forward. So.
And I'd just like to echo those comments, and maybe it includes middle school. I think just getting your input on how can we be more adaptable with this ever-changing situation, and so maybe even as one high school goes back to a hybrid, or just being able to react as the situation may change, and having special focus on making sure our younger students, K-3, K-5, have the opportunity to get as much instructional time this year as we can provide.
Well, not knowing you were going to bring that up tonight, I had a conversation with Dr. Cook just today, and so I would support having them evaluate that and get back to us.
Okay, thank you for bringing that up. I'd be in support of at least learning more as well. Dr. Cook, any questions about that ask? And then I would just ask you time frame to bring something like that back, if you could give us something.
Yeah, I think the first thing is I just want to clarify that what I'm hearing is that we would actually modify the reopening plan so that it would potentially include changing the orange category that would likely continue full-time learning for either K through 3 students or even as up to K5 or even including K8 if warranted as feasible and logistically possible under the criteria that would still currently exist. And I just want to clarify and make sure that we're not talking about changing any of the criteria, the gating things. We're just talking about the fact that in the plan that we would be modifying potentially would be modifying kind of the logistics of operations that would include the potential for elementary schools to function as full-time in Orange.
And I think it could even be more just providing flexibility in the plan, that we don't have to move as one large cohort, K-12, but there's flexibility built into that plan to allow the board to adapt to the situations as they arise.
Okay, I would guess if it were a simple set of guidelines, like that would say, for example, these are the changes would need to take place for K3 or K5 or K8, we could probably turn that around fairly quickly. I would guess in the next 3 or 4 weeks, we could build something like that. If it was trying to build something that was a little more flexible and fluid, I think it would take a little longer, but I think that's something we could look into as we're building this and see what are the potential hangups. You know, we've kind of got a little bit of that in place already based upon what kinds of activities would be happening with cases in schools. At any given time, we could take a more stringent action in a school if the case is increased or those kinds of things warrant it. And so that piece exists currently. If we're talking about building in some flexibility that would allow, you know, a more fluid kind of transition between that, I think there's a little more there that we'd have to dig into, and that might take just a little longer.
I think I'd especially just be interested, you know, in the flexibility, but especially those younger grades. I think we're hearing from the community, and we know just the level of stress our families, especially at those lower grades, really face from jobs and childcare at that level, as well as just the face-to-face interaction, just for their educational experience. So if we could especially focus on that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Good. All right. Thank you. All right. So let's move on to high school student body reports. As you can tell, we don't have the student body with us today. We went 21st century with this. They've recorded video messages for us that the student body teams over at Coeur d'Alene High School in Lake City have done. So I'm going to turn this over to the back room because I don't know who's teed up first, and we'll hear from Lake City and Coeur d'Alene High School tonight.
Good evening, esteemed board chair, honorable trustees, Superintendent Cook, school administrators, and our valued community members. My name is Tara Nelson, and I am the new student council advisor at Coeur d'Alene High School. I am truly honored to be joining the Viking family, and I'm delighted to work alongside such a fantastic group of young leaders. We thank you for allowing us the opportunity to speak with you tonight. With that, I'd love to turn it over to our ASB president, Holly Hudson.
Hello, my name is Holly Hudson, and I'm the ASB president and a senior at Coeur d'Alene High School. I have been a member of student council since my freshman year, and I'm so proud to represent the Vikings. As you all know, it has been an interesting year in education. However, this has not stopped us from promoting school unity in spirit and focusing on education excellence and building community. We just held our first senior event of the year on September 30th. In lieu of our annual senior start, we held a senior sunrise. Our CHS Booster Club and our Viking Parent Network helped celebrate our seniors by donating breakfast items and raffle prizes. Our Booster Club president shared a few words of wisdom with our seniors to help guide them through this interesting school year. The seniors ended the event by writing down a personal note, letter to self, favorite memory, or a personal mantra down and deposited it in the class of 2021 time capsule to be reopened on the 10-year reunion. Homecoming week is October 12th through the 16th. We are planning a creative and exciting spirit week, royalty procession at halftime on Friday, and a drive-in movie. Details are currently being finalized. Our class officers are working to create PSA video announcements to distribute to the entire student body and to post on the CHS website. These video announcements primarily focus on health and safety, activity and event reports, and student and teacher shoutouts. We are also working on several community projects such as tie blankets for the homeless shelters. We look forward to a great year at CHS. Our students have been incredibly flexible and diligent about wearing a mask and socially distancing in hopes that we can remain open and stay healthy. Thank you for your service and giving us time to share. We look forward to presenting again next month.
Good evening, esteemed board chair, honorable trustees, superintendent Cook, and district administration. My name is Lucy Dixon, and I'm the ASB president at Lake City High School. Also with me tonight are ASB vice president Jordan Lyon, ASB treasurer Brenna Hopkins, and ASB secretary Jay Miller. This has obviously been a strange year so far at Lake City, but we've been very proud by the way our T-Wolves have adapted and kept a positive attitude in the midst of all the changes.
Our normal events have been impacted by the pandemic, but we did just have homecoming last Friday, and it was really great to have an opportunity to get together and show our T-Wolf pride. We had a mini parade around the track before the game, and our usual halftime show featuring our amazing band, cheerleaders, and crowning of the royalty. Everyone had a really good time, and it was great to see such an awesome display of school spirit.
We also have great news to share. Congratulations are in order to Ryland Hoyt and Eleanor Tenbrink for being in the top 1% of seniors in the U.S. to qualify for the National Merit Program. They will have the opportunity to advance in the competition for a merit scholarship, and we are so proud of our T-Wolf scholars.
Coming up at Lake City, we have the SAT for all seniors October 28th, and fall sports are continuing. Our den has been amazing so far this year about wearing masks. They've had also awesome den themes, and they've done a great job helping us keep fall sports going strong.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight, and we'll see you next month.
Okay, thank you to both Coeur d'Alene High School and Lake City High School for providing us that unique update. Kind of a fun way to do it. So I think next week or next month we may have maybe a video from one of the music groups or something for our opening. Okay, so we have come to public comment. Before we do that, I'll read my announcement here. I'd like to remind the public, while this is a meeting of the Board of Trustees that takes place in public, it is not a meeting with the public. It is a meeting of the board to conduct district business. The district does allow some limited public comment on district-related items. Those wishing to address the board during the public comment period are limited to one comment, not to exceed 3 minutes. If you have additional comments that you would like to present to the board, you may provide those comments in writing through our board clerk, Ms. Town. She will ensure that board members receive the additional commentary. Please keep in mind that board members will not respond to public comment. If I determine that an individual statement is too lengthy, it's personally directed, abusive, or repetitive, I may terminate that speaker's privilege to address the board. Okay, looks like we have 2 folks signed up tonight, and I will call you up individually and ask you just to come up to the podium if you haven't been with us before. On the mic, there's a red button. Just push that button and make sure the light above it lights up. And first up is Mike Drager. Good evening, sir.
So I am Mike Drager. I would like to thank the board for being able to speak. I've sat on several boards myself and know that the work that you guys do. I don't have a child in the school district right now, but I have had 2 go through the school district who did very well and absolutely loved their time in the Coeur d'Alene School District, and I thank you for that. So the reason I'm here today is not COVID, but it is to discuss the property at Hayden Meadows. And if possible, I'd like you to not proceed with that transaction. A couple concerns that I have is, number one, it's such a valuable, non-replaceable piece of property. The location is fantastic. The access is fantastic. It's a property that can have multiple uses, and although you're at the school board and we're considering school uses, you know, some things such as a city park, partially, possibly, sports complex, farmer's market, art on the green, emergency management, staging area, just so many uses that we probably haven't even thought of yet. It would just be such an advantage in the future to have that. I know that part of the discussion was that Hayden is really not growing, but you know, the eyeball test of going around Hayden is there are a lot of new smaller subdivisions, usually smaller lot size, which means younger families, which means, you know, more children. So I think that there probably will be some more growth. I certainly understand you have a fiduciary obligation to the school district and not to the community, but I would assume that the $1.5 million is actually a fraction of the school district budget. So, you know, I don't know that compensation would come close to the value of that property for future generations. We could always have a task force to look at it if we could set that aside for a while, if we needed it to be an income-producing property, if we need to pay for management, people like Sting, junior tackle, rugby, you know, there's a lot of possibilities. And the second thing that I'd like to talk about regarding that property is I am a huge sports advocate for schools. I come from a teacher, coaching family. I know that obviously it's a place for exercise, it's a place to fight childhood obesity, we all know that, but it's so important for many of these kids that rely on teachers and they rely on coaches as role models. And you know, they learn the value of trust and hard work, sportsmanship, respect, teamwork, all starting at these facilities and starting at these fields. You know, my wife is a nurse at Venture, and you know, we just see these kids that need, you know, they need that role model, and a lot of that starts at that level. They get into high school, and some of them even get into college, and that's where that all started. That's where it begins. So I thank you for your time, and I think it's just a very important consideration. Like I said, even if that could be tabled. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And next up is Rick Rasmussen. Good evening, Rick.
Can you hear me? Is that on? Yeah. So thanks, board. I appreciate your time tonight. I've been coming to these meetings for a long time. I was the student body president back in 1984. Came to Mr. Brumley's dad was my principal, and I was coming to these representing Coeur d'Alene High School. Since Coeur d'Alene High School opened in 1970, there's been a Rasmussen in that building. My dad taught there for 35 years. My daughters went there. My wife went there. She teaches at Hayden Meadows. I went there. My brother now works there. So there's been a Rasmussen in that building all 51 years. I was the speaker at that senior sunrise the other day. I went out and met those kids at 5:30 in the morning, and what a great event. Everybody in math, but it was, you know, still celebrating, trying to put some normalcy towards a crazy time. So I was out there talking to those kids about being active, going out and meeting a freshman, going out there and talking to them. And that's what I'm here today, is sports have been a big part of, you know, there's been a Rasmussen. I won the Coeur d'Alene first state championship football team. My brothers both won a state championship. My wife won a state basketball and a state softball, and my daughter's won a softball. So we have state champions in our house. And active kids are better kids. My dad was very much a proponent of building Lake City High School because it gave 2 kids to be the first chair in band, 2 kids to be student body presidents, multiple kids to be on teams, and active kids are better kids. So I'm here the same thing talking about the Hayden Meadows. I don't know if it's too far down the road, but I think there's ways that we could help support money. I just helped the Humane Society raise $6 million for a brand new building, and there's ways that we can go out and help support. My dad started junior tackle. He was on the first board that got kids involved with it. There's Sting Soccer. I've seen your daughter. I was at the game the other night. She's a phenomenal player. They need places to play. Once you lose these fields, you will not get them back. In town, you will not get them back. You'll be out there driving to Athol and Sandpoint because there won't be fields in our community to go. I was out there, our hospital partners with the school district. We provided over $20,000 worth of gloves and masks and everything to start your school this year. And we out there and we helped all the 5th graders at Hayden Meadows have a day to shoot rockets. Where did we shoot the rockets? Hayden Meadows Field out there. We lose this space, you will never get it back. Teamwork, when you're part of a team and you're part of doing these things, that's what we look for. We have 450 employees out where I work at. We look for Coeur d'Alene High School graduates, Lake City High School graduates, kids that went to school in Coeur d'Alene. We want people to come back to jobs. We want folks to not have to leave this area when they graduate so they can have good jobs here. But they need to understand what part of a team is. They need to understand, how to be involved, how to give back to your community. So I don't know if it's too far down the road, but I just would really urge you that you take a look at it. And $1.5 million that we can go out in this community and help find money elsewhere or trade land or whatever. I just would be part of a task force or at least something to consider. But once you lose this land, you're never going to get it back. And it's such a key thing for so many organizations to do. And we owe it to our kids. We're here for the kids, just like education-wise. We owe it here, same thing for activities for kids, because once you lose it, you're never going to get it back. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rick, for taking the time to join us tonight and share your comments. Okay, that's going to end our public comment period. All right, so we will move on to the consent agenda. I had a request to pull item F and separate it out. So if there's not any other requests, is there a motion to approve consent agenda items A through E and G through I?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. And then is there a motion to approve consent agenda item F?
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Nay. Okay, motion carries. All right, next up, item 8 is just consent agenda items that are in our packet for information. So hopefully you had a chance to review those. No action needed on those. And so next up will be our finance presentation. Dr. Cook, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Morse-Rowe. I'd like to introduce Katie Ebner. She's going to talk a little bit about the coronavirus relief funds that have been released by the state, the federal dollars that were allocated. I think the state got $99 million. She's going to talk just a little bit about what communications we've been having with both the state and the feds about those dollars.
Thank you, Dr. Cook, Chair Morse-Rowe, members of the board. I'm just going to talk really quickly about these additional CARES dollars that are coming to the district. First, I want to go back to March 27th of last spring when the CARES Act was passed. We just want to make sure we're not confusing the two buckets of CARES funding. The first was the ESSER CARES funding. And then the second that we're going to talk about tonight is the new coronavirus relief funds. The ESSER funds, we budgeted for them for the current fiscal year. they were directed towards the funding cuts from the state. So they went to make our budget whole as far as we didn't have to do layoffs because of those funds. And the reason that we could use those funds in order to balance our budget was the guidelines for the ESSER funds was very broad. Activities that are necessary to maintain the operation of and continuity of services. So continuing our services would be keeping a full staff on. So that those funds helped us when we built our budget. So we don't want to mix up that 1.6 million with these new funds. So the new funds are the coronavirus relief funds. The CARES Act allocated $150 billion to the states in order to address impacts of COVID-19. On September 4th, Governor Brad Little announced that he would allocate $99 million of this allocation to K-12 public schools. And on Friday, we received confirmation that our allocation for Coeur d'Alene School District is $3.5 million, just under $3.5 million. So the uses for the coronavirus relief funds, it's less broad than the ESSER funds. And just to read from the documentation that come with these funds is these funds are for necessary expenditures incurred due to the COVID-19 public health emergency. So that feels pretty broad, right? This leads us to a bit of controversy in Idaho. So when Governor Little announced the distribution for K-12 public schools, he also announced that the funds were discretionary and that they were to backfill funding cuts from the state. And that Little's guidance on the funds is in direct conflict to the U.S. Department of Treasury, which is the agency that oversees these federal dollars. So there's a little bit of controversy. Well, the most significant limitations are for staff salaries. So that creates quite a bit of conflict between the two, between Little's guidance and the U.S. Department of Treasury, because when Little says that these funds are backfilling cuts from the state, the two areas that the state cut were the career ladder and leadership premiums. So those are both salaries and benefits. So when we look at the U.S. Department of Treasury guidance, we would not want to see any sort of strings attached as far as salaries and benefits. But we do see that there are only 3 uses for salaries and benefits. The first being unbudgeted positions specific to addressing impacts of COVID, hazard pay with some limitations, or overtime related to COVID-19. So there wouldn't be any way to restore career ladder steps or leadership premiums given the guidance from the U.S. Department of Treasury. So between Little and the U.S. Department of Treasury, who would we side with or whose direction would we follow? We would follow the U.S. Department of Treasury because Little doesn't have oversight or authority over federal dollars. So we would want to go to the agency that has oversight over this money. And Little may even be feeling differently about his guidance on these funds because on Friday he issued a memo from the governor's office with guidance that aligned more with the U.S. Department of Treasury. So that's the whole backstory of the controversy there. And then as far as accountability, one thing that came out with these funds was that the feds in the state were not going to require school districts to report on how the funds were used. So that doesn't mean we're not going to have any oversight of the funds. Our auditors will ensure that we're in compliance with the guidance from the U.S. Department of Treasury. So this will be part of our annual school district financial audit. So we do need to make sure we stay in compliance. And to date, items that fall within the allowable uses for the grant, we've come up with a pretty long list of some costs, unbudgeted costs that we've taken on in order to open school safely. So these would have come out of likely fund balance if we hadn't received any additional federal funding for the opening school safely. So some of those were HVAC filters and ionizers, nursing overtime, and PPE, remote curriculum to deliver blended learning, technology costs, additional technology to deliver blended learning. And then our e-school, we needed to add a few positions as far as administrators and office staff. So that would fall within the guidelines of the grant. So moving forward, we are going to continue to make up the list of unbudgeted costs to address COVID-19 within our district. We're going to bring a budget to the board likely by the end of October, early November to be approved by the board. One thing to keep in mind is that these funds need to be spent by December 30th, or we need to have a purchase order approved by December 30th. If we do not spend all the funds by December 30th, we will have to send money back. So we need to make sure we get a budget approved and the money spent for items we need. So went through that very quickly, but I will give you all an opportunity to ask questions.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Any questions for her tonight? Katie, doesn't look like any questions here. I may just ask one. Are you continuing to receive guidance? I assume that they're, like many things, kind of evolves daily or every few days, and you expect more clarity as we move forward?
Yeah, a lot of districts are scrambling right now, trying to find ways to create flexibility within the guidelines to meet, the unique needs every district has. I am going to listen in on a national webinar on these funds. So hopefully moving away from the politics that are happening in Idaho will give some clarity as far as really what are the uses for these funds and how can we make the best use of them for our district.
I do have a question. Hey, Katie, I saw that, or I heard that you mentioned the funds were used for staffing for eSchool. So it is possible for these funds to be used towards staffing issues associated with COVID-19?
Yeah, so I'm just going to go back to it to make sure I don't misquote it. But these funds can be used for unbudgeted positions that are essentially just new to your budget, new to your organization, that are specific to addressing COVID-19. So we talked about, can we move eSchool teachers over there? And there was some specific guidance that came out that because the teachers are they're not new to the system, unless we hired more teachers overall in the system, we wouldn't be able to move them over there. But the administrators and the office staff are new to the system, and they were specifically hired to reopen school safely.
So potentially with that thought process in mind, teachers that were moved over to the eSchool, then those positions could also be filled using CARES dollars at the schools where potentially there's a need to lower class size or create, environments, for running 5 days a week where students could be more socially distanced. Is that true?
That I would want to get a little bit more clarity on. I did see that there was a Q&A. I'm trying to remember what the answer was, but I'd have to do a little more research on that one.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Ms. Ebner? Okay, thanks, Katie, for joining us and giving us that update, and we'll see you next month. Okay, we are on to item 10, which is an information action item on the student advisory group. Dr. Cook, is this you?
Yes.
See Kelly coming up?
Yes. So this is been a long time coming. I'm very excited for this on a lot of levels. The first one, number one, Kelly's going to get an opportunity to present to you guys. Secondly, we're also going to recruit one of you to be a part of this work. And so I'm going to introduce Kelly Nichols. our assistant superintendent for secondary curriculum and instruction. And so, curriculum. And she is going to present some of the guidelines that we've worked out for the student advisory group. And she's here to do a little plug for board liaison for that group too.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Yeah, so we're really excited. We're starting the student advisory group. And I am eager to share with you guys so just some details, but also I know you guys will probably be fighting over this opportunity to be the liaison and hang out with our kids. But we are going to have student advisors from 2nd through 12th grade. So we want all kids from all 3 levels, and then we will have an opportunity for them to meet in grade levels, so elementary school, middle school, high school. They'll meet monthly, and then they'll meet as an entire group district-wide quarterly. And that time, they'll have an opportunity to be with our board liaison and our superintendent. They'll be with other district leaders every month. We hope to kind of spread out and be a part of the conversations. But really, this is their advisory. So it's an opportunity for them to inform us of what we can do better, for them to tell us what they would like and more of or less of, an opportunity to just really understand what the actual experience is and the impact of the decisions that we make. So we're really excited. You'll also have an opportunity to hear from them. Well, I think they'll present every month if there's something to share. And we'll have a president who will be an upperclassman, but we hope to have presentations from students at any grade level. So with some support. And we're really looking forward for the opportunity. So we shared some information with you. You can understand the process. We're recruiting advisors. We want 1 advisor for elementary, 1 advisor for middle, 1 advisor for high school, and then student applications for those who want to be representatives as part of our committee. Any questions?
Kelly, I know initially when we were talking about this, we were potentially going to have a student representative here at every meeting, and maybe that was the report that you were referring to. Is that kind of one and the same? Yeah, so the president of the advisory committee, that student will be here every month, but we'll also hope other students will come, and so you get to hear voices from other advisory committee members.
Okay, thank you for the update on that. Just a little background. So we approved a policy for the creation of this several months ago, probably 4 or 5 months ago, maybe longer than that. Maybe for a background in the general public, for people like me that forget, I think originally we started talking about this when Dr. Olson was here as an interim superintendent in his 1 year with us a couple years ago, and then as we transitioned and student Lillian Smith came to the board with the idea and brought it kind of up again, and I think rejuvenated our interest in it and Dr. Cook's interest in it, and so thank you to you all for kind of taking it and getting it set up here. As Kelly mentioned, we're looking for a board liaison. Tambra's not here, so she lost her opportunity. But is there someone who wants to volunteer, or is there multiple?
I'd be willing to volunteer if someone else wants to do it together, or now that I'm not doing long-range planning, I have more time, and it'd be nice to get to know the students and encourage their participation in decisions that affect them.
That's fine with me. Okay. Thank you, Lisa. So Lisa May will be your liaison.
Yeah, if there's more than one board member that's interested, feel free to join in.
I'm good with long range right now. I think that's a good spot for me.
I am happy to be your backup.
Fun.
Yeah, I'm happy to be your backup, Lisa, or if you want co-chairs, then that's allowed. We could do that too. But yeah, I'm very interested in the group, and happy to be your backup.
Well, you'll all always be invited to the quarterly meetings, but not required. And those of you who will be co-chairing or backup, we'll just loop you in on the email so you can see constant communications and hear the good work of our team. Thank you.
Lisa gets student advisory. I get negotiations. Doesn't seem right.
Student advisory will likely have pizza even, so just saying.
Okay. Doesn't seem right. All right. Let's move on to our action items. Am I getting ahead of myself? No. Okay, we're on to page 2. So action items, we have two items with us tonight. One is a resolution, and I'll just give kind of a quick overview on this. So we had a few gentlemen here talking about this tonight. The Hayden Meadows fields, or soccer fields is what we commonly refer to them. But several months ago, the board authorized district administration to put that property out for sealed bid, and that process was completed about a month ago. I believe we had 8 qualified bidders, 7 or 8, and the top bid was $1,525,000 and some change. And at a meeting a few weeks ago, we authorized the superintendent to go ahead with the next phase of that, which was to finalize the purchase and sale agreement, but it does have to come back to us for final approval. So that is why it's on our agenda tonight as an action item. It's a resolution, and there is a motion in the packet, but is there any, before we consider a motion, any discussion?
I just want to acknowledge the comments by the gentleman tonight, Rick Rasmussen and Mr. Drager, and I know we all read his letter as well. And I do sympathize and I do appreciate the commentary, and I don't know that one of us, or maybe except Rebecca, hasn't had a kid play on that field. I have one currently. You have one currently playing on that field too. And so I just don't, I want it understood that this decision doesn't come lightly to anybody here. This isn't just a piece of property to any of us. We understand and appreciate the importance of it, but understanding what the long range planning committee's recommendations were and this district's need for land, from my perspective, the financially prudent and responsible thing is to have a surplus that we can use to buy more land that we can build on, because that's what's been recommended, and that's why at least I have been in support, despite the amazing things that field has done for this community. That's why I'm in support of continuing to move forward with the sale.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo Trustee Brumley's comments that this is not an easy decision by any means, and that land has been well utilized for many years, and so it's with a heavy heart that I would agree to move forward. I'd also like to acknowledge that, with the announcement of the new development on the west side of our community, it's more imperative than ever that we get land in that area quickly, and so I think this will enable us to continue our search and hopefully find land where we can most or better utilize it in future for future students.
I would agree, as Rick mentioned, all my kids have played soccer out there, and I've spent probably hundreds of hours out there watching games, raking fields. I think I aerated it one year. I've overseed it. I've fixed divots, painted lines. I've spent a lot of time out there, and those fields are dear to me. And I think they are valuable. They will be difficult to replace. For me, I guess I balance that with what are our responsibilities as trustees of a school district, and I'm not sure it's parks or it's not parks to me. And while it's served the community well, and I'm glad we've been able to do that for 20 plus years, I think the district has a responsibility to our taxpayers and our students to acquire land, and unfortunately that's an unbudgeted item in the state of Idaho. There is no state funding for that. That's all in the local taxpayers' backs, and I think it's imperative that we acquire property where it's needed, and unfortunately that requires the sale of this property to do so. So I will be in support with a heavy heart.
Yeah, I think I'll just chime in as well and just echo all your comments as someone who is a proponent of parks and the ability for kids to be outside. No one likes to see that maybe be changed, but I think our responsibility is to schools and is to following the long range strategic plan that was just passed and continuing to look back to see what those recommendations are and following through on them and moving forward on those. And so definitely echo everything that you said. And I too am in favor of moving forward, but with a heavy heart.
And maybe just some follow-up on, I know we talked earlier with Mr. Voller at a previous meeting just about how we can support the Timbers Thorns organization and junior tackle as well, that are the primary users out there. And I know he's having those conversations. I think the purchaser, they're going to have some talks, but they're going to be able to support soccer at least through the fall and potentially into the spring or through their spring tournament, which is one of their big fundraisers. So there's still some details to get finalized there, but we're trying to make that a smooth transition. Okay. So if there's no other comments, is there a motion to authorize the execution of Resolution 20-21-005 as presented in the board packet?
Second.
Okay. It has been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the resolution, or the motion, excuse me? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries, Ms. Town. And then, let's see. The next one up here, Dr. Cook, are you taking item D, which is the annual continuous improvement plan? That's
Yes. Yes. So as you guys know, we are expected by statute to produce a continuous improvement plan annually and have that into your hands. It's actually expected to be presented in the beginning of October. And so it's that time of year. And at this point, I'm going to ask Dr. Mike Nelson to jump on the Zoom and share with you some of the actions that we're moving forward with, even though this is going to be, again, a difficult set of circumstances this year with regards to assessment. We are already in the process of assessing students. If many of you may be aware that we, in a very quick and fairly efficient fashion, had essentially assessed all elementary students with IRI, K-3 students with IRI, and I think we're just about finished with that. The due date was extended to October 9th because so many districts across the state were either remotely functioning or in a hybrid model. Took a little extra time, but just some examples of that, and I'm going to let Mike talk a little bit about the continuous improvement plan as it pertains to this kind of atypical year. So Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Dr. Cook, as well as Chair Morrisroe, members of the board. Yes, our continuous improvement plan is mandated by statute to look at our performance data and also give us an opportunity to identify some potential goals for the coming year. Naturally, this is a challenge because of the fact that we really did not have many summative assessments provided. So it was really imperative for us this year to start our assessment program right away, to look at how students are performing, and as well look at some trend data over the last several years to come up with the draft benchmarks that have been chosen in front of you this evening. In the middle of your packet with that, you will see a table which identifies metrics that are chosen by the state of Idaho, to which we needed to look and fill out. For your graduation rate, those percentage of students who are college and career ready on the SAT, percentage of students who perform at different levels on the ISAT in the spring, as well as percentage of student performance on the spring IRI. Additional measures were important to us, and the balance of quality assessment and graduation with certificates, with workplace readiness, was also mentioned by our subcommittee as important. So we do have goals in that area as well. The final piece that is mandated in the continuous improvement plan is college and career advising and performance metrics around college and career advising. Specifically to those, what percentage of our students achieve an AA degree at the time of graduation or also graduate with a CTE certificate. The percentage of students whose annual plans, their 4-year plans, are reviewed, which unfortunately was all in the spring for us this last year. The percentages of students who go on to post-secondary education, as well as those who are taking AP classes within our district as well and sitting for the exam. So we've provided those metrics for you and packaged it up in draft form. We would love to be able to hear any feedback that you have so that we can make adjustments and fulfill our responsibility to the state.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nelson. Any questions regarding the continuous improvement plan?
I have a couple. Mike, I have a couple. Should I just kind of roll through them and we'll attack them one by one, maybe, potentially? The first one is
I've got
about
my notes ready to go for it.
Okay, perfect, thank you. The first one is under all students will be college and career ready. So the 2019 cohort, it said, is that our number, 79.1%? Is that the metric that we achieved last year? Is that correct?
I'm in the file and I can see the area of college and career ready. And are you looking in at the top of the column in orange? Is it the school year 2018-19 or 19-20 that you're reviewing?
No, I'm looking at the 2019 cohort and it says 79.1.
Oh, okay.
Looks like on page 19.
College and career exam on the...
Yes.
Yes, that is correct. However, keep in mind that our sample size was very low this last year. That is correct as of, but we only had 84 students complete the SAT and or ACT outside of the spring testing window, which was canceled.
Perfect, and I kind of just wanted to draw attention to that because I thought that number seemed a little bit different than last year. What was our benchmark number last year? Do you recall?
For the previous school year? It was, I believe, in the mid-30s. I would have to look that up specifically, but somewhere around 35 rings a bell. Please allow me some time. I'll grab that for you.
No, I was just trying to make sure that we had picked because it looks as though with this data that we're decreasing our standards or our goals for our students because 79.1 achieved it, but then now we're asking for 60. So I was just curious what our benchmark was for last year.
I'll be glad to provide that for you.
And really just 60% a good number for us, I guess, is my question. Is it a fair number for a goal for this year?
35.6 was our previous benchmark.
So that is a fair benchmark, okay. The next one I had a question on was, scroll down here. Oh, it was the, where we have 100%, we want our benchmark to be 100% under the, all students will be college and career ready. So scroll down a little bit on that, from that page. And the CTE track, the high school students who graduate with an industry recognized certification. I wondered if that was low again last year because students weren't able to take their test because of the abrupt end of the year, and if 100% for both of those is also a good metric or a good number.
You are correct. Many of the college and career readiness exams and or industry certification exams were canceled. They were not able to be provided via remote learning. I was actually talking with Mrs. Nichols, our Director of Secondary Education, our Assistant Superintendent, and this was a mutual goal that we had. We do believe that this is an area that we can ramp up to make sure that we have greater students involved in our CTE programs.
Perfect, thank you. That's what I was hoping for. My last question, I promise, is down to the AP. And, you know, I was looking at the numbers year over, and where are we here? Oh yeah, there we go. So the very last, section 5. And it looks like, you know, we went from 20 and 19 down to 17 participating and taking at least one course. And then we want to increase this by 10% this year. And I wondered if maybe you could speak to what are we going to do to move the dial on that? You know, is it through investment in professional development? Is it through targeting or reaching out to students? How do we grow that program when we haven't been successful in that during the last several years?
This is not an area that I'm as familiar in. With that, I know Mrs. Nichols and I have been talking about our longitudinal participation in AP. I know that it is a plan, but I don't have any of the specifics to that plan right now, and I'd have to defer to my colleague if she were available.
Hi. Yes, that's an excellent question, Trustee May. So this is, I would consider this a low percentage increase, but that's in response to the current year that we're in. I'm hopeful that if we are able to revisit graduation requirements and high school scheduling, which is also on the agenda today, that we will be looking much more concentrated on our 4-year plans and access to advanced coursework, college courses. I have all kinds of ideas. But I definitely think we need to, to be perfectly transparent, was really shocked by the lowness of those numbers, and definitely have a priority for us to include far more, if not all students in all of our high schools who at least have one AP course.
Yeah, I was reading about the success of the AVID program down in Boise, and I wondered if this is a topic that we've had so much on our plate that maybe we could look forward to and say maybe hold a place marker for it as we move through this year, because I think it's an important topic, and I know many of the board members also support growing that program, and what does it take to grow it, and just starting the conversation would be fantastic.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nichols. Any other questions?
Yeah, one quick question, Dr. Nelson. I'm curious, with the testing that's already happened and that'll wrap up at the end of this week, how soon will we be able to see some of those results and really get a handle on where our students are at right now, especially some of those in the lower grades? Where are they reading at? And I'm anxious to see those numbers.
Not a problem. I couldn't tell which trustee that was, but I will. I'll be more than glad to answer your question. Our testing window for most assessments closes this Friday. I should be able to start rolling up summary results, but I can tell you the results are live in classrooms right now. So our teachers are already using those data points to be able to make sure that the right interventions are in place. In addition, our district has made substantial investment in instructional licenses to be able to help fill the gaps in identified areas, specifically in mathematics. So I should be able to have summary results for you this next week, however.
Great, thank you.
That was Trustee Smith, by the way. Trustee Smith. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Nelson, for joining us tonight and sporting the bow tie as usual. Even at 6 o'clock at home. Okay. I think we get Dr. Nelson again here, I'm guessing, as we move into information. Oh, yay, thank you. No, yes. Thank you.
I'll just do it. I'll move to approve the continuous improvement plan as presented.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Thank you for keeping me on track, Ms. Brumley. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries, Ms. Town. Okay. Now we're moving on to information items. Dr. Cook, do you want to introduce here?
Yeah, I think now's a really important time to bring this conversation back up again, and that is this idea of how are we going to do the best we can to track what's arguably the greatest impact on our students' educational journey in their lifetimes for right now. And so part of that is just how are we going to make sure we know how kids are performing. So we're going to take a pretty high level look at this today, and I'm going to ask Dr. Nelson to kind of give a little bit of a timeline and some of the discussion topics for how we're planning to attend to that this year and how we hope to deliver upon all those things. The coronavirus was a significant disruptor last spring, and we're going to try to find ways to continue to monitor how our students are progressing this year. And it's, while I think it's going to be a challenge, I do think that we have a plan for that. So I'm going to turn this over to Mike again.
Thank you very much. That was a nice introduction, Superintendent Cook. Appreciate that. And Chair Morserow, members of the board, thank you for having me back again. Yes, I'd like to take this time to talk to you about what we're planning on doing in the 2020-2021 school year, specifically around our assessment program overview and goals. One of the most important parts of this is to remind ourselves that we have a brand new comprehensive assessment plan, so I'll be referring to it a couple of times today. But this assessment plan really is asking us to move away from the lockstep data collection that we would be often doing in the No Child Left Behind days, and also looking at what we can do to be able to provide valid, reliable, and resourceful data points about how our students are performing. So I'd like to continue through this a little bit with just kind of a quick overview. If you were to navigate to slide 3, I'd like to remind you that the most important audience that we talk about in assessment is our students. In order to have that valid, reliable, and dependable data, we need to make sure that they're doing their best work and that their work accurately represents what they can do. So one of the things that is in the comprehensive assessment plan is our student assessment bill of rights. We have created a common presentation, a slideshow, that we've asked our content teachers to provide before every formative or summative assessment that we provide in the district. And the reason for that is that we want students to know all of these things. We want them to know why we're choosing to give them an assessment at this point in time. We want them to know what they're trying to do. What are the targets? What are their goals to be able to do on this? We also want them to see, because in many cases they see an instant score, we want them to know what performance looks like. Is their score good? Is their score something that needs to be improved upon? What areas specifically are they looking at? We also want to make sure that when they get results, they actually know what they mean, and that we're very clear on how we are going to use those results to improve our instruction with them along the way. So in order to fill out that gap, we have selected certain assessments that we feel allows us to do two things. Number one, provide that valid, reliable data. And number two, also allow students to do their best in a remote environment. So you see the assessment pyramid up on this screen. This is the structure of what we provide. We will first be providing multiple national assessments. These are important because we'll be able to see how students perform relative to a national cohort. In addition, these benchmark our students against other students. We do have some state assessments that are required under current state law. And then we're going to go down the pyramid a little bit more and start looking at our local benchmark assessments, specifically about what we need to do to better measure the portrait of a graduate. Again, the whole idea there is linked on that right sidebar that we want to use multiple tools and strategies. We're not going to rely just upon one thing, so that we get varied, fair, and reliable, sufficient measures on how students are performing. That's in page 8 of the comprehensive plan. So let's start at the top of the pyramid and work our way down and talk about our national and in some cases international assessments. I have them presented in alphabetical order here for you, including the ACT, AP exams, the PSAT, and then the SAT, which is offered in two different ways, which I'll talk about for a brief moment. ACT, we actually have very little participation. Under this last year, about 30 students opted to take the ACT. This is usually because they're interested in attending a university that is specialized, such as Embry-Riddle University, which is a university that specializes in engineering. Many times they prefer the ACT because you can actually get content specific rather than a generic English language arts or mathematics. Our AP exams are scheduled there. I think most of you are familiar with that, and I hope that you had a chance to look at the results that we provided a few weeks ago. The PSAT, this is a new one for us because normally we do the PSAT during the school day, but because of the limitations and the time that we actually had to put in our order, we opted to do this on a Saturday. And I was very pleased. We had over 450 students of sophomores and juniors who chose to pre-register for the PSAT. And we're going to be offering that in just under 2 weeks. So information has been going out to those families who have opted in. The other thing that is important is the SAT. Keep in mind that in order to graduate from an Idaho public school, a student must take a college entrance exam, the ACT or SAT, and the state only pays for the SAT. Our current seniors, last year's juniors, did not have a chance to participate. So we are working to provide 2 SAT school days this next year. One for our current senior class on October 28th during the school day. That is a no classes day for underclassmen. And then we'll do it again for the current junior class so that they can all meet those goals. Anytime we provide a national or international assessment, those results will be available in aggregate on the district website, and parents and guardians and families can access their scores specific to those assessments on either the ACT website or the College Board website. Let's head one level down to our state assessments. And in fact, when I was previewing this over the weekend, I totally forgot one. The civics assessment is a mandated state assessment. It should be on the first row. That is in the same windows that you see there for the Idaho Reading Indicator. We provide it 3 times a year, once in the fall, once in the winter, once in the spring. And it's the same assessment that any immigrant to the United States would take. It's the nationalization and citizenship exam. Our students have to pass that assessment at least once, well, only once, in order to graduate in an Idaho public school. In addition to the civics assessment, we have the Idaho Reading Indicator, which is mandated in the fall and spring. The winter assessment is also a benchmark, which we opt into. And we will be able to see those scores coming up this next week. The ISAT is scheduled in the spring, both the ISAT by Smarter Balanced, an English Language Arts and Math assessment, and the brand new ISAT Science, which is the new assessment of the change in state standards from 3 years ago, will be on the docket for this spring. Finally, we had 6 buildings who are chosen to participate in the Nations Report Card Assessment, the NAEP. Those buildings are identified: Atlas, Bryan, Canfield, Lakes, Ramsey, and Woodland. And a random sample of students will be chosen. They will work with the building principal to be able to provide those. Unfortunately, we don't get any results for NAEP, but otherwise, aggregate and cohort results are always provided on our district website. And printed reports are available for the IRI and the ISAT assessments. One more level down, we'll go to our local benchmarks. You'll see a familiar face in there. In the middle, the IRI. We actually provide the IRI 3 times a year, as I mentioned, but we also offer monthly optional progress monitoring every month. So for our students who are most intensive need and we want to really watch, we can actually pinpoint their growth month by month in a variety of different areas. That gives you an idea of what a benchmark assessment is. It's the type of assessment whereby you are trying to plot a trend line to make sure that all students are meeting toward or leaning toward meeting their state targets in their content areas. In order to do that, we have 3 different tools that we use: iReady Mathematics for students in kindergarten through grade 8, iStation Reading for students in kindergarten through 4th and 5th grades. K through 3 is officially the Idaho Reading Indicator, and 4-5 is a local benchmark decision. And then we have a brand new assessment. You may be familiar with NWAA MAP, and we have opted to replace MAP with a new tool called Illuminate FastBridge, which I'm actually going to give you a little bit more detail on in a moment. For families, each of these assessments will be provided in those 3 time frames, and we will provide a printed score report to all parents, and we'll have an opportunity to talk with our students on how they're performing. On the next 2 slides, I actually would like to take a few moments to break down Illuminate FastBridge to you. It may be something that you're unfamiliar with. We sat, as part of our comprehensive assessment advisory, we sat a group of educators and principals together and support staff and said, well, in order to meet the goals in our comprehensive assessment plan, what are the things that we need to do? A couple of things came up. Number 1, we need to be timely. With the MAP assessment, we were seeing that students could be spending up to 2 hours assessing. And although the data was good and we could track how our students performing, that really took some time away. Additionally, our English language arts teachers were not happy with MAP. Again, for the same reason, it was a lot of time. The other challenge was that it came in 2 flavors. Students had to take a reading assessment as well as a language arts assessment. So ultimately, it wasn't a good fit for us. We started looking around and we found another tool that we thought would work well. And when we chose FastBridge, we also got an added benefit that we have an optional social emotional behavior assessment available to us as well. We have not decided how we're going to use that yet. I'm working with their team this week. But in many cases, you'll be happy to know that this is a nationally normed assessment. So you'll be able to see how our students are progressing, but we'll also be able to look at how they're performing relative to a national sample. This is a computer adaptive assessment, so students' questions will become more challenging or more easy based on the pattern of their responses. And the most important piece is that this is remote testing capable. That was another limitation of MAP, is that it could not be taken outside of our district's firewall. This assessment is estimated at a 20-minute assessment for both reading and math, and we have opted to provide it in grades 6 through 12 in English language arts classes, and in our mathematics at the high school level, 9 through 12, including those students taking math courses in our middle schools. The last and very best part of it, it is also a cost savings over MAP for us from the previous year. And I did provide for you recently a summary of this, including some family reports that we'll be able to provide for that. All of the assessments that we've talked about, for the most part, are remote testing available. So should we need to move into a different level, such as a red, we do have the abilities to be able to administer our assessments more readily in an at-home environment. But we've only talked about the top 3 levels of the pyramid. We also need to talk about the bottom parts, because frankly, that's an area that we didn't really have a lot of tools available to us. Again, the comprehensive assessment plan is asking us to put more emphasis on the formative and interim assessments, specifically around those that are going to measure the portrait of a graduate. To be able to fully understand how a student is growing in critical thinking, in character, in communication, creativity, we need the input of our content teachers. They're going to be the best measures to be able to see how students are growing. We already have rubrics for this area, but we're in the process of developing new formative assessments during our curriculum process. So when Katie and her team are bringing people together and they're looking at the goals and objectives, we now are embedding common formative assessments as part of that work. In addition, we should be able to start providing some digital badging and some progress monitoring toward that, possibly by the end of this year. But again, the biggest piece of this is how we make sure that our classroom teachers understand what quality assessment looks like, and that's on the next slide. And much of that is embedded in our new instructional framework, which was the very first piece of our new strategic plan. So as we are rolling that out, specific areas of planning and student-centered learning will be reinforced to talk about quality assessment practices, including conferring, what to do with work samples, how do we measure for understanding, and those types of pieces. We will have a parent newsletter that will be coming out this week, which will give an overview of our assessment practices as well, and a quick note to our families as to what they can expect after the window closes with their first set of reports that will be delivered to them. I hope that that provides you a little bit of background, but I'm more than glad to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you again, Dr. Nelson. A lot of information in there. So why don't we open it up for questions?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Nelson. One quick question that I have is just regarding eSchool, and what does assessments look like with those students, with 1,100 plus of our students in eSchool? Will everything be done through FastBridge then, or what does that kind of look like with that whole model of education?
Trustee Smith, I knew it was you this time. The camera panned to you, so that was helpful for me. Yes, our eSchool students are students in our school district, so they participate in the same assessment program that we have. They have the same goals and objectives of using iStation, iReady, FastBridge, depending on which courses and grade levels they're in. So their scores will be rolled up in their buildings, but we'll be able to also tease them out as we would like.
Will all of their assessments be done online, or will there ever be a need to pull those kids in to do something face-to-face or in a building, or is it all done remote?
almost everything will be able to be done remotely. The only challenge is going to be for those national assessments such as the SAT and PSAT. There is no computer adaptive assessment for those assessments, and it is a face-to-face administration. So in those cases, we make sure that we meet the students' either individualized education plan goals, their 504 goals, to make sure that they're in a safe testing environment.
Great, thanks.
My pleasure.
Okay, any other questions? Dr. Nelson, in the local benchmark assessment area, or Dr. Cook, we didn't mention EOCs and of course assessments, EOCAs. It was, I guess, in the rubric or in the pyramid there, but it wasn't called out. And I know over the last couple of years with curriculum development, they've kind of faded away in a lot of course subjects, and I believe it's part of Ms. Groutman's plan to bring those back. And so just wasn't touched on it in there, and just if you could speak to that, Dr. Cook. Or
Yeah, so I would agree that there is a plan to start bringing those back. There's work currently going on now in the math curricular work, and I don't know if Katie wants to opine on this, or if Mike, if either you want to, or do you want to kick it over to Katie if she's available? I think there's an opportunity to expand upon this.
I'm more than glad to address a little bit as well. As part of our work, we are also pivoting toward making sure that we have performance assessments included that better measure our portrait of a graduate in addition to our content for each of our subject areas as well. So yes, we are in the process of revising our end of course assessments and may need to also look at how we approach board policy around those areas, because I think that our goal is much greater than just measuring the overall content of the course.
is Katie on there? There she is.
You're still muted,
Right
Katie.
now, Katie. Hang on.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good evening, board members and Superintendent Cook. Yes, I would just echo what my colleague said. We are looking to, we actually have as part of our, as part of what we've done with the Secondary Math Academy, we have created revised and of course assessments that were part of what was adopted over this summer. We are working on refining those. Some of them are still not yet in their very final stages, so we're working on making those even better and more aligned. But as part of our continuous cycle of improvement, we will be working on evaluating the data that we get from them so that we understand what was strong and what needs to be revised and to be made better. And part of that too, as my colleague said, is not as simple, not necessarily a simple multiple choice or straight answer. Part of this is a performance task that helps us demonstrate more of the competencies of the portrait of a graduate. So we can be looking at, especially in math, we can be looking at rich tasks that ask students to really apply some creativity, some critical thinking skills with their math skills.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions regarding the assessment information? Dr. Nelson, I have one more for you if you're still on with us. In regards to PSAT and moving to Saturday, is that, do you envision going forward that'll go back to a school day event in normal operating years?
That's a great question. I frankly was very surprised with how many students signed up for the PSAT, but on a Saturday. One of the limitations that we have is that the PSAT is a national test date. So we have a couple of days that we can choose from. I think after this assessment, it'll be a good opportunity for us to really look at how the PSAT fits into our comprehensive plan. It's been nice over the last several years that we can look at both cohort and non-cohort growth in the PSAT. But frankly, the results have been somewhat flat over the last couple of years as well. So certainly offering the PSAT is probably still going to be an imperative for us. However, I wonder about how it fits in the big picture, and I'd love to have anybody's participation in that as well.
I had a question.
Just one maybe observation. This is with my parent hat on. On a Saturday during regional sports and all those sorts of things are going. So I know a lot of students, mine included, that are signed up, but with the potential to have a regional sports competition that same day. And maybe if it's a model we move to offering alternatives or multiple testing dates, I think would be beneficial. Perhaps we'd see some of those numbers up, because I know some people didn't sign up, for calendar conflicts, and just given a little more choice there.
Yeah, sure. And Trustee Morris-Rowe, we do have the potential for a makeup for that date. The date is October 28th, which is the same day that we're offering the SAT in the building. So if students are unable to make it, there would be communication that goes out. The question is, currently we're trying to find balance in making sure that we can have enough students in to take the assessment per the guidelines of the College Board. But if a student cannot make it on the 17th, we may be able to accommodate them on October 28th, and more information will come out to that for those who are pre-registered.
Okay, thank you. I believe Ms. May had a question or a comment there.
Yeah, I just had a question. In the past, our ninth graders took the 9-10 PSAT. Do you see us going back to that model again, where we'll be offering it during the school day to our ninth graders?
That's certainly a possibility. The PSAT 8-9 was a good measure of our incoming classes because of the fact that it really measured both the end of middle school and the beginning of the high school. That was an assessment that we provided for 2 years. I think it's probably in that same vein of college and career readiness and what that pathway looks like. I don't see that it's something that we can't give. The question is whether it should be provided to all students during a school day or whether it should be made as an option.
Yeah, it did seem like it provided us quite a bit of data last year, and I know the prior years when we were trying to cohort and just look at math programs and such, and it provided parents, I think, with a really good snapshot of their student entering high school, kind of where they were and what maybe they need to look at. So just be curious next year, depending on what it looks like, if we could offer that again.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All right. Let's move on to item F here, which was a board request to just get an update on secondary enrollment, in particular to class size. So, Dr.
So
Cook?
trustees, as you know, this has been a moving target for us, both at the secondary level and the elementary level, and just a really tough thing to pin down. So I think I'm excited also again to have Kelly Nichols here to share some of the data we've learned about both the enrollment at the secondary level and the way that classes are kind of panning out at the secondary level. As you know, we've seen a fairly substantial drop in enrollment at the elementary level. We've seen kind of holding steady at the middle school level. And we've actually seen an increase in total enrollment at the high school level. And so she's going to share some data and some information with you tonight that should help us in getting a broader picture of that. Thank you.
Chair Morris-Rowe and fellow trustees, I am going to just briefly review our enrollment and kind of give some context into current class sizes, and then we can discuss, the implications, which are complicated. So hopefully I can break it down to you in a way that isn't edu jargon. So secondary enrollment's actually holding pretty steady. So overall, our district has seen I would say a significant decline in enrollment, and we also know there's a lot of dynamics around that. But our secondary enrollment has held pretty steady. Our current numbers are. Can I do it? Do I have power? I have authority here? Oh. Thank you. So we currently have 5,660 total secondary students, and that also includes e-school enrolled students. And you'll see that we have our breakdown of middle school students and high school students, and we also have it broke down by specific building. We are at 78 more students in the high school level than was last year in the fall 2019, and we are down about 200 students from the middle school level. So that's just an overarching list of enrollment. And then it's broken down again at the middle school overview. So we have, I have power here. We have the overview of the middle school enrollment, which gives you the blue is your e-school enrollment, and then the red is in-seat enrollment, and then the green is total enrollment. So just overview of the enrollment for middle school, and same thing here for high school. And so in addition to our enrollment dynamics, we've had some interesting dynamics in scheduling for e-school and building demand. So secondary schedules are really complex, especially at the high school level. And we had, a variety of families who enrolled in e-school, and we tried our very best to staff e-school appropriately for graduation requirements, particularly sensitivity for where kids are based on their grade level, and to fit into budgetary constraints. So we, at the time that we did our staffing and the bulk of our enrollment in e-school, this was a time where there was concern about our budgetary constraints and making sure that we had exhausted all options and we're really kind of packing classes. So I know there's concern about our current class sizes, and so I want to kind of give you an overview, particularly here at Coeur d'Alene High School. I know Principal Barrett has done a really good job of being very intentional with resource and scheduling to ensure that classes are somewhere in the magical range of like 26, 28 kids per class. So you'll see that last year there weren't many classes at all that were over 30. And this is specifically for core classes, so these aren't your elective classes and other classes. But you can see now that we have much higher averages and a higher maximum because we wanted to make sure that we were filling out all class sections because we didn't want to be overstaffed. So this is just an overview of what our of some class sections that you'll see here at like 32, 33. There's some classes that are even as high as 35. And that's not the norm. That's not something we want to persist. That's something that's in response to budgetary demands, e-school sections, and enrollment. So it's kind of an unfortunate mixture. And the same thing is happening here at Lake City High School. So they have a larger class size overall even in last year, but this year again, we have some really high numbers. And again, this is our schools responding to our request to say we can't have any low courses. Every class has to be we can't have like a 5-person class or a 12-person class. We just can't afford that right now. And so they did their best to collapse courses and sections to honor our budgetary constraints. And so that's what we're seeing examples of right now in this fall schedule. But again, also not the norm and not something that we have any intention of continuing. So the implications of this, here's some recent withdrawal, just kind of an opportunity to just see where our kids are going. We actually didn't have much withdrawal movement in September. A lot of that happened over the summer, but here was just some information that we were able to track with our withdrawals. And then, as I was saying, the e-school scheduling at secondary is complex. And we couldn't replace all of the positions or sections because of budgetary constraints. We are responding to budgetary constraints that are district-wide because clearly when you look at the enrollment, our enrollment's pretty steady. In fact, we have even more enrollment. So at the high school level, you have more students than you had last year. You have less staff, and you have some of your staff teaching different sections at the e-school. You have staff that you had that are teaching at the e-school. You have students that are yours, but they're not in your building, but they still count as your enrollment at the e-school. So it's pretty complicated, and it's temporary. And we're actually interested, particularly in these next few weeks, to see what happens at this quarter mark. There's a variety of reasons why parents signed their students up for the e-school. So we're waiting to see, now that we are in a different category, we're in 5 days a week, will that, based on the requests that we have for students to return back to their buildings, will that warrant enough where we could maybe collapse some e-school sections and then be able to level out some more sections at the high schools? Will that wait till the semester? Will that happen at all this year? We don't know. We don't know how many requests we have. We might also have it kind of be a wash where just as many families who would like to come back into the building, we might have that many families who would like to now attend e-school. So that's to be determined later in the month when we get those forms filled out. But that's kind of an overview. I know that our counseling teams and our administrative teams have been working really hard to best meet the needs of health and safety and well-being, the needs of the budgetary constraints, and then obviously the needs of our kids and making sure they're getting the classes that they need. So, and in the ways that they can best have them. But that's our current fall circumstance in terms of where our enrollment numbers are and what our class sections are kind of looking like. Happy to answer any questions around that.
What is your current wait list for e-school?
Oh, I actually don't know that answer.
Unless it's changed in the last 3 or 4 days, it's about 140. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. K-12.
Are those like kids in our school right now that are like doing the 5-day starting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, since I think Kelly kind of mentioned, so is there also a list of people who are indicating they want to come maybe out of e-school already?
Yeah, we don't know those exact numbers yet. We're opening up, so there's going to be like a transfer window. We're going to invite families either way to complete a form to request to transfer in at the quarter or out at the quarter. And then that gives our teams time to figure out how they can schedule students into actual seats or what students would leave seats and then be in the e-school. So we'll have much more formality in those numbers later in October, and they'll be informed early November so that they can make that switch at the quarter.
Kelly, maybe you can speak to a little bit about the max section numbers. Last year, I guess I was under the impression that we really, 28 was kind of the max. Mm-hmm. A counselor could go above to 30 without having to call to get permission. But now our max numbers are higher. There's no doubt that they're higher than last year. And when we approved the e-school, at least for me, it's an unintended consequence that our class sizes went up at our brick and mortar high schools due to budgetary constraints. Now seeing that we have some CARES dollars, and is it possible that we could address this in a fashion that would move more quickly than maybe, waiting and watching? I think we've heard from parents and we've heard from a lot of teachers who feel uncomfortable with these class sizes. And I think the unintended consequences are, if we have an exposure, we're quarantining a lot of students potentially in one class. And we could have students sitting on the sidelines. If we could get class size down, we can social distance better. And I know that has been helpful for us in the last 2 weeks, having some exposures. Teachers have been able to say, my students were 6 feet apart, we're safe, and we didn't have to quarantine as many students that potentially this year or this week, in this next month, that we will have to with exposure. So what would it look like to shoot some numbers to reduce class size? Is that a viable path moving forward, I guess, is the start of the conversation?
Yeah, I think just as Katie explained earlier, we're not sure how we can spend that money. So we do know that, like, for example, we have some teachers who are teaching over their load, so they're teaching like 1.2 FTE, 1.4 FTE versus just 1.0 FTE to supplant necessary courses for e-school. We're hoping that extra FTE that we're paying for that was not budgeted will be able to be covered by CARES Act, but that's still only through December. If we were to get approval that we could use that kind of money, I don't know how we would be able to fund it post-December, if indeed we would have to continue that what's the salary. So
Again, no, like the max is definitely 28, 30 would be like a large class size by our standards, right? Really, we like much lower class sizes, but budgetarily we can't afford it right now. We are going to explore all options and see what we can do, but we can't do like a temporary fix either in the way that could potentially cost us more money or have other teachers lose their jobs.
I think that's the part that's a little bit tricky and confusing to understand for parents and for staff is that our enrollment has not decreased at our high schools. And so therefore, last year when we created a budget, we were able to provide a certain level of staffing ratios. Because that hasn't changed and we're not able to provide that this year, that's a hard concept to understand, I guess. And so in my mind, I've been trying to say, well, we haven't dropped in numbers. We should have been able to have at least the same number of staff at our high schools, our brick and mortar high schools that we had last year, or relatively close. We know that our high schools have lost FTEs. Some are losing 5 FTEs. I don't know what Lake City's are, but how do we account for the loss in FTE at a brick and mortar high school with the same number of students compared to last year? How do we answer that question to the public and to our staff?
Yeah, Dr. Cook, I can speak, but I don't want to speak out of turn if you want.
Well, that's the exact right question. The problem we've got right now is an overall decreased enrollment and an increased enrollment at the high school. And these CARES dollars that right now the answer is when we ask, can we spend these in certain ways, the answer we get from the state and the answer we get from the feds are out of alignment. And so we're staring at this directly. And then also our existing teachers saying, hey, remember when we didn't get a step in a lane in negotiations last summer? Don't forget about us. And we're being asked to do more than we've ever been asked to do before to get through this pandemic. And right now, this is really hard. And oh, by the way, did we mention Schoology? And we brought that in and started training folks on that all. And so we wind up in this position where there are all these competing actions for these resources. It's a fair question. And right now, the answer isn't an easy one, because if we're going to do something, we're going to have to go back to the budget and we're going to have to pull something out of there to make this work. And I think that's the challenge we're looking at, is trying to determine and ascertain whether or not some of these teachers are coming back. The answers aren't hard, but boy, do they have impact and do they have implications across the entire district. If we are going to take some formal action to reduce those, every time we purchase a teacher, it's about $75,000. And so we have to come up with the numbers that would justify that. And I think because of the pandemic, it's been a moving target. And so you're right, none of us are happy about this. It's been a significant challenge for all.
Yeah, and I think that it just escalates it more now that we're back in 5 days a week and we know that there's risk associated with crowded classrooms, and we now have that. And so saying, all right, let's get some answers about these CARE dollars, and if there's an opportunity to fix the situation to improve safety for our students and our staff and ultimately our community, I would like to pursue looking forward at what that looks like, at least considering it.
Absolutely.
I would think, when you look at the enrollment data, you look at elementary, for instance, it's had a pretty significant decrease in enrollment data, but it's, at a school of 350 or 500, whatever it is, they're losing, let's say they lost 50 kids, it's 10 per grade. So you didn't lose a whole section. And so you still have 3 sections of third grade. We just have beautiful class sizes at elementary right now. It's the lowest, maybe in the history of our district, with, some of those grades at 20 kids on average, or 22 kids. And so I think that's where, just looking at numbers, that's where I would guess a lot of the secondary kind of took a hit, because you can start crowding those kids together, but it doesn't work at elementary. You can't have 40 third graders in a class. And so while we lost kids in those buildings, it didn't, at a lot of schools, it didn't reduce the sections, or, you lost a section and a half worth of kids. And so you lost, you reduced one section, but, and I'm guessing that's what we're feeling a lot of this from.
Yeah,
elementary's super low, and secondary's a little high, and secondary's maybe paying for elementary a little bit.
And we're challenged with this kind of transitory circumstances with regards to COVID. And as we try to navigate that, trying to figure out this moving target, the building, if you will, of an e-school on paper doesn't necessarily cost more in staffing, but it definitely impacts staffing. When you start talking about who's coming out, each one of those students that are participating at the secondary level are going to have some access to some form of electives, and those are additional costs. And that's something that we can map out, and that actually maps out very well to the way the CARES money can be spent. It doesn't necessarily, if we decide we're going to try to find a way to allocate those dollars to reduce class sizes, that is a different approach, and that's going to be a challenge. And I think that's the one that if we do decide to go that direction, number one, it's going to be we're going to have to come up with a funding source because that's ongoing. And number two, we're going to have to make sure that that's a decision that we're prepared to make because it could have impact across other parts of the district. And I think that's the part we're trying to thread the needle on right now. And there are competing interests. We cut our budget substantially at the request of the governor, and right now there is very little margin for error, and I think that's what we're seeing right now at the high school level, where we feel it in class sizes for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's really a twofold issue, right? I think the second part of your statement was, moving forward, if we keep an e-school, these teachers at high school will have to be replaced. We can't continue to operate at this level of capacity. And so those positions that were not filled, that were transferred to an e-school, would eventually have to be replaced if we're going to continue with an e-school. Fair enough. But then two, compounding that, we're just trying to get through this year, limp it along, keep everybody safe and healthy. And so I think it's exacerbating a long-term question. And could we build a budget with an e-school and keep class sizes at a high school level that are fair and fair to staff and fair to students? And I think that's kind of the approach I've been looking at it. But the first question is, how do we get our classroom size in a safe, down to a safe number for certain classes? Then next, if we continue, year over with an e-school, it's going to require some budget changes, knowing what we know now about enrollment at a high school level.
So let me suggest that we build a comparative staffing document that looks at the way things were funded for maybe 18-19 and then 19-20, and then look at it for 2021 and give you guys a memo or a report on how that looks. And then arguably we could carve out what's the impact of the e-school with regards to those class sizes. I think if we have a little bit of time, we can produce that document. It might be helpful to this conversation.
Yeah, and I think also to note the future of the e-school, the current e-school model is students are still their home school attending e-school. With the future e-school model, it'll be its own entity. So those students won't count as like Lake City High School students at e-school. It'll be your e-school student or your Lake City High School. That will also help improve the dynamics of staffing and enrollment counts in a way that just doesn't right now.
I would think just something that's important. Dr. Cook, you mentioned our friends with the Coeur d'Alene Education Association and kind of their desires that they've expressed with additional funds, because we weren't able to fund some things that we have in the past with steps and lanes and those sorts of things. And Ms. May, Trustee May mentioned, we've heard from several teachers concerned about class sizes. I think it's important that we remind our CEA counterparts of that, and that maybe they speak to their members to see, because there potentially could be some give and take there as we try to balance that out, like there always is. Right. And oftentimes in the past, class size is something great to talk about, but when it comes down to it, salary is where the discussions land. And so certainly if it couldn't be addressed this year, I think moving forward, that's something we need to continue to try to balance out.
And I would just remind us that we have a $1.6 million infusion of federal dollars that was given to us back in, I think, July, that will not be baked into the next year's budget, and it also a $500,000. Katie, if she's still on, can clarify this. A $500,000 kind of vacation from the Percy submission that we would then have to absorb. So arguably, that's $2.1 million that would be out of next year's budget that we're going to have to account for. And if you just do the math on that, just divide that by $75,000, you can see the number of teachers that arguably that funds, if you want to talk about that. And I want to be clear that I'm not talking about cutting teachers. It's just the way that we do the bill when we start talking about math, since about 85% of our budget is directly at the resource of people, that it's a simple way to look at how we build this. And I don't want to underestimate the amount of work that we're asking our people to do right now. This is a very difficult challenge that we're trying our very, very best to deliver upon. And we're asking more of our teachers than we've ever asked of them. And it is not lost on me, I know it's not lost on you all, that these challenges are very, very, they're big. And to try to deliver, whether we're in an orange model and you've got the benefit of spacing kids out because we can reduce class size, but you also have to be able to deliver that, and it takes some skill with Schoology to deliver a product that is going to be meaningful to both kids in person and at home. And when we move to yellow, now we bring everybody in, and it might be a little easier in the delivery mechanism, but now we've got a lot more people in the classroom. And so it's to talk about one aspect of this and say we need to solve that, it's a competing balance for so many parts of this. And I think that's what we're trying to deliver upon. And I think that's the challenge that our teachers have responded very, very well to. And I'll just be honest, our kids are hanging in there with us. So I'm proud of all of them. And we will continue to attack this at every level we can, because this is, it's been a good year, but it's been definitely some problems that have taken a lot of energy and creativity to try to solve. So I do appreciate the question. I do appreciate the opportunity to discuss it with you all, but it's not lost upon us. Those numbers are high.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions around that? Okay. So why don't we keep trucking here? We're kind of in the home stretch. We've gotten a little long-winded. We're kind of further into this meeting than I thought we were going to be. We're not as far into the meeting as I thought we were going to be. This next item, G, is really for us to give some feedback to administration and help prioritize some of the work they're doing that's outside of operating school in a COVID time period. And things we talked about, which seems like forever ago, but it really wasn't that long ago that we were talking about these items of common high school schedules, graduation requirements, the southeast boundaries. I almost forgot all about that. And school start times. And those were really 4 topics that a lot of energy was poured into last year. And they've been on the back burner for the last few months. And I think administration likes some direction from us. They did a nice job of refreshing our memories in the documents, and I know they're going to give us some presentations here. But that's, when presentations are done, that's what we're going to be asked to do, is just provide some feedback, some guidance, and maybe some prioritization of where we're at. So I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Cook, and we'll get going.
Thank you, Chair Morserow. So this is actually our request. We would love to have your feedback and input on this right now. If you notice, these 4 items have all been very important to each one of you and all of us as well. But in the life and times of world with this pandemic right now, there's got to be some prioritization. We would like to have some discussion around these. So I'm going to ask Kelly, Jeff Voller, and Seth to refresh our memories on kind of where each of these 4 categories landed, or excuse me, where each of these 4 topics landed, and where it was staged when things kind of had to shift gears and we had to focus on reopening and getting things back into a functional mindset. And then what we'd like from you is some discussion around what could be pushed off of the back burner and just hard pause for right now and give us some ability to really focus our work, because if we're going to try to deliver upon all four of these while we're functioning in this world that we're currently living in, I'm afraid we're not going to be able to deliver a product that's viable and useful for our community. And so these are all really big topics. We put a lot of time and money and energy into them, and we'd like to continue that work at some point. But right now we feel like there needs to be some level of prioritization. So I'm going to ask for those three individuals to present on each of their topics. Kelly's going to present on the first two topics to start us off with. Then Jeff will talk a little bit about the work we did with the boundaries, and then Seth will finish up with the work we've done on school start times, just to kind of reframe that for you and get it back in the fresh part of your mind so that you can give us a little bit of feedback. And we are also glad if you want our opinions where we feel like this work would be or our energies would be best served in delivering upon these. So I'm going to start by turning it over to Kelly.
So I in the packet sent to you, there was included the January board notes. So a long time ago, back in 2020, pre-COVID, there were normal board meetings where an amazing presentation was shared on behalf of Dr. Cottle and her team around schedule changes and an opportunity to have aligned graduation requirements. From what I've heard, it was something that was very important, and it will be a comprehensive process. So I want to kind of I want to review with you an opportunity of what we would be proposing if this would be something that you would want to move forward with, and kind of give you an insight into the timeline as well as we think about decision making and then when things would be in result, right? So there was a look at different types of schedules that would ensure that Lake City High School and Coeur d'Alene High School would have a similar schedule. Right now they have extraordinarily different day-to-day looks and course offerings and graduation requirements. And so we would align those and ensure that students would obviously have they would very much have a Viking identity and very much have a T-Wolf identity, but would also have similar graduation requirements and have a similar looking day and access to courses and so forth. So that's, I guess, more of the technical aspect of that. But obviously, if we do change a schedule, particularly if we, depending on if it's a modified block and all of those dynamics, it's not something that we can just decide in May and then pull off in September. There would be significant professional development that would need to occur, especially with the graduation requirement change, is just how we grandfather our students who started in one set of requirements and then we'll be entering in with a new set of requirements, the way that we instruct, and of course course offerings as well. Hiring would be impacted by that. So it's a pretty substantial task. It's also an opportunity for us to kind of move forward collectively into the 21st century of what our portrait of a graduate, opportunities of how we're going to graduate students really competent for what's next. So that also gives us an opportunity to look into, again, as we talked about, AP course offerings, the 6-12 model, how we're really engaging in students in their post-secondary plans as sixth graders. I mean, really 7th grade can determine your fate, what you have access to in terms of mathematics. And anyways, there's all kinds of conversations that can occur around this. But it would be a robust opportunity where we could get a stakeholder group together this year to formalize what would be in the best interest of our community and of our schools in terms of what the schedule could look like and what our graduation requirements would look like. And then we would have a year for development and planning and professional learning around that so that it would kick off the following year in 2022. So that's what this proposal is. Happy to discuss, again, if this is something that you would want to prioritize or want to do and look at different timelines. This would be one that we think would be most comprehensive to have a quality shift and really engage the community in a thoughtful conversation and a collective decision-making on what our schedules could look like and what our courses would be and what our requirements would be for our students moving forward to graduate ready for the 21st century. So with the hopes of a nice balance around college and career, that if a student wants to, anyways, all kinds of things, internships, dual enrollment, all of those elements, and how would we have a set of time that would help contain that type of learning desire versus a set of time determining what learning outcomes students have access to. So that's kind of a blend of the graduation requirements and the schedule together, and what our action or direction we would like from you is if you would like to proceed, and if that timeline works in terms of the stakeholder
collection, and then how we would start that process pretty quickly here. Any questions?
One quick question just to clarify. So if we started this process and went after it full steam ahead, would it be the 2022-23 school year that we would implement? Just to clarify that timeline.
Yep.
Okay, thanks.
And just another clarifying, so your really request or what administration would like to do is continue to work on these two items together. You believe that you could have a recommendation in spring 2021, so 7-8 months, something like that, 6, 7, 8 months, to bring back for board and public consideration, I would assume.
And in that, to clarify also one last time, so with school start times, since we'd be shoring up schedules, would it be easy to go ahead and parlay into that too, since we'd be?
I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me, but
Yeah.
that would be up to you guys.
It seems like on that topic, most of the work has been done, right? The committee's wrapped up their work. They're probably wondering when we're going to weigh in on the committee work that they did. So I would hate to leave it out and not include it if we're moving forward.
So that is in our discussion here, just separate, because I think it's Seth that's bringing that up. So we'll get to that momentarily, I think, after we're kind of done with this. Are we happy with the direction that Ms. Nichols is taking this and that she's proposed? I would imagine it's the wheels of change move slowly, right? And so I don't know that when we started talking about this, a while ago, that last year, if you would have asked, I don't think the fall of 2022 would have been acceptable or appropriate, right? But a lot's happened since then, and it's probably just a reality to me, of where we are. I think it's unfortunate, because I think there's a lot of benefit to the students in going through this process, and to our future graduates to provide opportunities differently than we provide them currently. I hate to see, well, that's just another class that's impacted by us moving slow, but I guess I'm supportive. I think anything sooner wouldn't be realistic.
Well, and it wouldn't. It's quality control, right? It's making sure that teachers and scheduling can be accommodated. But I agree with you. I'm probably the most impatient person in this room in terms of what kids need right now, and all kids deserve right now. So I'm with you.
I do wonder if the graduation requirement piece is probably the most simplistic piece of it, and by waiting to address that, then I think, as Chair Morris stated, it's another class of students that, especially for CHS, because they don't have the flexibility in scheduling, that they're limited to electives. And I've seen that be impactful as a parent, but also hearing from community members that because we have so many additional graduation requirements, it's really difficult for those students in a 6-7 period bail schedule to take electives or grow their electives. So is that something that could be separated out potentially, since we did quite a bit of the work on that? We had a workshop. It seems more straightforward than many of the other topics. I don't know, it just seems like it might meet in the middle, allowing some flexibility. It's not going to change the scheduling. It just would allow for more electives to be taken potentially for students.
Yeah, it could definitely be considered, and I think we could have that on the design process in terms of like, is this possible that we could do it a high quality way that doesn't create more inequities or differentiation of access, particularly with still such significant different schedules at each high school. But I don't think it's off the table. I think it could absolutely be considered, and if we could present it forward and do it right, we could maybe shift our requirements by next year.
I would think where the difficulty lies within that, and I don't know, I can't recall the exact, but I think Lake City is 10 or 12 more elective requirements than Coeur d'Alene High School is. But they offer 4 more periods a year, right? 2 more per semester. The difficulty would be, let's say you find some balance there, or you raise the requirements at CHS, you have to like if you don't change the schedule, they can't get more classes, right? You've made it harder because they have more requirements, but not any more time or scheduled class time periods to meet those requirements.
One of the things I think that could be done is whether or not there is interest in potentially reducing the requirements that we would have, not necessarily focusing in on elective or core, but there, if you recall, we presented, I think, 4 potential areas that we could consider that we could reduce back, like technology requirements, or maybe we allow something to be waived out, or speech, for example, and those were some of the discussions that we were having. And I think we could prioritize that because it wouldn't be predicated on the schedule that we were running, but perhaps could free up some opportunities for students before we got the schedule work finished. I think that's at least something we could look into, fast tracking some of that conversation. I think that might be doable.
I think there's a lot of creative options in terms of the Portrait of a Graduate, performance assessment opportunities, ways that we can be really intentional about student learning access that doesn't lower our standards, but allows a much more intentional design in ways which students can earn their graduation requirement. So it's not like, oh, we'll just lessen this, it doesn't really matter, we can't schedule it around it, but here are things that really do matter to us, and here's alternative ways in which we can meet those requirements so that students aren't harmed by a limited schedule options, particularly in that transition year, but then would be much more robust once we have a formalized district-wide schedule.
Yeah, I would feel a lot more comfortable about pushing this off and slowing the timeline down if we could achieve at least a piece of it, and they would allow at least CHS students to have more flexibility in taking some electives. And I don't think it would change necessarily the outcome of their high school experience necessarily, especially now that Portrait of Graduate work is finished. I think we do need to talk about, are some of these current graduation requirements still really relevant to their high school experience?
I agree.
And are we more harming their overall outcome by requiring that they take classes that maybe aren't benefiting them like they used to in the past? And the technology, I think, is one that we had talked about. But
I agree with all of that.
Remember like a month ago, we'd still be here at this time, it was light out, right? It just, when the sun went down, it just seems later. Okay, so I think general agreement around that we would move forward with the proposed timeline and look to maybe make some of those more immediate changes in the interim, or recommendations for those changes that come back to the board on those graduation requirements. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up, Southeast Elementary boundaries.
All right.
Good evening, Mr. Voller.
Yeah, good evening, Chair Morris-Rowe, members of the board. Boundaries. As you know, we started the school year with new boundaries that we set up last year and the work that we did with flow analytics. And when that came to the board, we had a lot of discussion about what were we going to do with the schools in the Southeast. And ultimately, I think based off of some community feedback and deciding that we wanted to maybe look a little bit more at demographics and further study some of the options, we made the decision not to change the boundaries of the elementary schools in the Southeast. So the schools that did not receive any change were Fernan, Bryan, Bora, and Dalton. And so part of the decision at that point was to continue to do some work on that and work through some different options for that. The committee did do some work on what some scenarios could look like for the future, and I don't think the committee came to full agreement on what those might look like either as well. And so that was part of why we stalled on making further decisions for that. And so I think part of the question right now is, just in light of the current circumstances and workload on staff, is what is your guys' priority level for that? And if we do continue with this, what would that look like and what would you guys want to see? A couple of the tools available for us if we do want to continue this work is we have kept flow analytics on retainer, so we would just pay them on an hourly rate for some work and they would consult with us. They have introduced another tool to us as well that is not as robust as the GIS mapping program that produces the maps that you see on the screen and I gave you on your desk. But we could run some scenarios internally and take a look at some different options through that with that kind of backdoor, less robust version of that program. So there are a few options available for us if we want to continue to do this work. And so I think those are the questions, and we're just looking for some guidance on where you'd like to go with that for the future.
Okay, I'll open it up for kind of questions or comments regarding that.
So my thought is that we have had such a change in our elementary enrollment this year. I know that the question, the issue of prioritization has come up. And so in all candor, if I'm prioritizing these 4 things on here, for me, because it's so shook up in terms of what our elementary enrollment's going to look like a year from now, I feel like this would be at the end of the priority list. And I worry that if we retained flow right now, or even used our own resources to do that, are we going to just be recreating the wheel again next year when enrollment completely changes and we get back, 1,000 students, in large part in elementary, and where are they at, and what is that going to look like? So I'm pretty hesitant to spend a lot of admin resource, and I'm sure Jeff would appreciate a break with everything he's been doing, because I'm sure you can fill it up with other things. Those are my thoughts.
I would agree with Trustee Brumley. I'd like to see enrollment numbers at elementary level stabilize and really see where we are moving forward next year. I don't know that it would be prudent or in the best interest of our community even to attempt this process this year. There's just too much instability and change, and priority-wise, I'm with you. It's probably the bottom of the priority for this year.
Jeff, do you have any idea on how much time, if we were to look at this area, given that we just did so much work, and I don't want to lose some of the work that the committee did, because the farther we step away from it, the more it doesn't maybe honor the time and effort that was really given to this a little bit. And so any idea on how much time and effort it would take to just really focus in on that?
I think it depends on how many scenarios we'd end up running with this. Ultimately, I think it would probably be several weeks worth of work to, sit down and dig into it and, learn the side of the program that Flow has given us. That there's going to be a learning curve with that a little bit. And then creating some of those scenarios and then, sending those to Flow. So there's going to be some back and forth. So, my best guess with this is probably be 3 to 4 weeks worth of work.
Yeah, one of the questions I had down here was just how would we complete this work with so many unknowns around our student population, particularly at the elementary level with, numbers down 800 or 900 students at that age group. And so I guess that was a question I was going to ask you. And do you feel you could do the work with those missing holes? Not missing holes, but missing students. It's kind of hole in the data, I guess it'd be. Because I just don't see how the work's done. And so I guess I would agree that it would have, to me, it'd have to be deferred. But
yeah, I think we'd have to look at data from last year, the same data that we were working off when we created the boundaries, just to, because we know that there has been some change with that, but I think you would probably need to look at that type of data and make some assumptions that perhaps some of those students might come back or transition back into the future, but you're making assumptions with that as well.
And I would just remind us that had we implemented everything in the plan and all of the boundaries were changed as, I think as one version of that the committee saw and maybe supported to some extent, those students that were uncomfortable or those families would have still pulled out of those respective boundaries and then come back. And so those boundaries weren't built for this year. Those boundaries that were recommended were built for the next 5 to 10 years. And so I anticipate that at least using them as a starting tool, whenever that conversation starts again, would be a prudent thing to do. But I also think that the farther this thing gets pushed along, the less likely it is that remains relevant. And I think that's just, there's going to be some level of distance that you get away from that work, in which the recommendation from our team at some point is going to be, we probably need to bring some analysis back in and redo some of that work. So,
Jeff, one question I had is when will you have some SES data for us for this year?
When will we have SES data? Yeah, again, that's something we'd have to put on the radar and, figure out how we're going to sort through that and provide that for you guys. So, I know there'll be some, but it's also really different because some of the free and reduced lunch numbers are not as accurate this year because lunches are free.
Right.
So there's not as much incentive for people to fill out the paperwork for that. And so I know within our team, we've been kind of struggling with how to really get accurate data, just based off the fact that some of the paperwork is not being filled out as complete as it has been in the past.
And the reason I asked is because when I was in my mind reviewing our goals or our priorities in doing rebounding work, it'd be difficult this year because all of these schools that we're discussing are below capacity. And so what would be the purpose for rebounding or asking families to move right now? I think our purpose is a little bit different until we see some stabilization or enrollments return the following school year. It would be harder, I think, to make changes.
I wonder, just listen to what Dr. Cook mentioned there and Mr. Buller about getting kind of further away from the work that's been done and the impact that may have. Really, looking back on this, at least what my memory is most of the heartburn was around Brian and Bora and kind of the non-continuous model that Brian currently operates in, and really a direction of the committee, and what I felt like at the time was kind of a direction from the board of let's look for kind of harmonious, continuous boundaries, and just a lot of heartburn around that because that was kind of a massive shift for those school communities, and maybe the years spent on discussion around that and what does it mean to be, to move to this, or what is the need, because I think there was a lack of understanding or maybe even agreement that's important. And so maybe if this year, if we couldn't move to a full shift in these boundaries, just talking a little bit about that with those school communities and really focusing on those two schools. I think Dalton and Fernand were kind of cleanup work based on how those other ones fleshed out, but I think the bulk of the lift is around Bora and Bryan when it comes to southeast boundaries, and so maybe if we do want to keep moving forward, maybe it's around those two schools and in kind of further discussion.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it was some SES work too, with Dalton and trying to equalize some of the factors that were board priorities at some stage, and so that's why I wondered maybe we need more data to kind of see how it looks this fall, which will be hard because we won't have as accurate data, but. Yeah, I think the picture's changed, and so it makes it more difficult.
And if you recall, we started to kind of push towards this almost this feeder model, right? And we wound up spending a lot of energy talking about where you would go, and not just in a new boundary, but then long term, like for years to come, based upon the growth and development. Like this was going to be a pretty substantial change if we would have taken the full recommendation of the committee at one point. That would prepare the district for many years to come to have that kind of feeder model that would shift eventually. If you recall, Winton would eventually move into the CHS feeder once the Lake City kind of wedge grew out, if you recall. And so I think part of, like for us, I would suggest that if this is going to be something that we want to do, that we don't just narrow it down to some small aspect, that we maybe say, okay, we're going to sit tight on this for a while, but we're going to go back at that pretty hard and heavy, whether it's next year when we feel like we're going to be at full enrollment again or something. But there was a lot of information there that was really going to be important for long-term stability, and if we were going to continue to build out on the west side of town, that incorporated potentially new schools, both middle school and elementary school being added in that general vicinity. And so there's a lot of layers there that we had actually kind of baked in pretty cleanly to some extent, and finding some solutions in the southeast was just one portion of that. So.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. And I think the last point that I want to kind of acknowledge for our families is this has been a really stressful year for them. And I hate to add any more stress this year. We've heard from families over and over again that remote learning was hard last spring and the hybrid's been difficult, and we don't know what the next 6 months will hold. And so for me, I agree this work is important and we can't get too far away from it because it loses its relevance. But I'm not sure I'm comfortable adding any more stress to our families this calendar year. But
I think Ms. Brumley said she was supportive of the idea of kind of holding off on this because of the unknowns, and Ms. May said it, and I would certainly support that. So, in the interest of time, are we in agreement on that?
Yeah, I think so at this point.
One thing time may buy us in this regard is, last year we were playing with hypotheticals with middle school and an elementary, and maybe with time we can have more concrete information around potential future sites and those sorts of things. And it may help a lot with kind of the big picture of what's this look like long term. So.
I think one thing I did bring with me and review, not to bring it up, but it is the audit. And so I did bring the audit, and I wonder if going back to that a little bit in our own heads, what are the priorities that came out of that, and definitely some of that boundary work comes out of it, but especially just those graduation requirements, that if we had to pick something that directly benefits the district and pushes us ahead to achieve some of that, putting our efforts into that would be a priority for the district. So I'll leave this here.
Can I suggest? Suggest or
to drive our work?
Can I suggest or either suggest or ask for potentially some feedback at which point we would like to, a timeline as to when you'd like to have the boundary discussion back on an agenda item? Maybe, I don't know if 12 months from now is reasonable, but it seems to me that we'd have a pretty good idea of what enrollment looked like in October of next year. At least if there were, if some of the things we expected to happen were going to happen, it might seem reasonable. I don't know if that's too long for you to wait, but I would at least think that would make a lot of sense as far as a predictive model.
That seems long to me. I guess my initial thought was like late spring, like towards the end of the school year, having some sense of what things look like, at least bringing it back for discussion of what are our numbers looking like. When would we want to start really delving back into this? I feel like I'd be ready to have a conversation about that in the spring. It might not be that you don't start it until the fall, but I feel like a whole year from now is a long time to not talk about it.
I think I would agree with that. I think last year we got very late in the timeline when we made a decision, and I would think you'd want to make some decisions or recommendations, in that October, November timeframe. So, I think visiting it in a late spring and at least saying, okay, are we ready for this, and how are we going to start back up and dive into it? And maybe you need to wait till September to get kind of that firm enrollment, like, okay, how many really show up kind of information. But if you could get things moving ahead of time, and then September you kind of plug the data in, and October you're presenting plans and making decisions.
Because I wonder then if that implementation, if we start that, then all happens then at that 2022, 23 fall becomes our figure, and the implementation of it would happen at the same time as the Bell schedule and those types of changes. Because if we don't start until spring talking about it, we don't have a recommendation until fall, you're still in that same timeline then. So
yeah, no, that's fine. I think the only thing we wouldn't know, and I think Chair Morsrow hit it on the head, which is we're hearing anecdotally, but nonetheless, it's still a bunch of people telling this, we're coming back to the district. We just need a break from this. It's too unstable for us to, this is my version, that they just don't want to try to deal with this. And so we'll be back. And so I anticipate that we'll start to have a pretty good feeling what that'll look like next summer. And so we may be a little early, but I think we can do the preliminary work in the late spring and then start to map that out forward and then start to make those discussions about what it could look like through the year so that the 22 fall would be the time we would have whatever those solutions might be. That seems reasonable to me. I'm a little worried that we're not going to know a ton more in April, for example, than we know right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Okay. Seth, welcome.
Good evening, Chair Morrisroe, members of the board. As you might recall, we spent quite a bit of time last year on school start times. We formulated a committee and started meeting last October and met about 6 or 7 times throughout the course of last school year, culminating with the committee's recommendation to you in June of this year that school start times be flipped. So secondary and elementary be switched starting with the 2021-22 school year. We also, in July, had transportation present to you and just talk about some of the impacts that might cause to transportation. And so that's kind of where we stand today.
And Dr. Cook, do you have a recommendation on this, or is there?
Yeah, I would like us to just hit a hard pause on this and to bring it back up and circle it into the conversation after we've got graduation requirements established. If there is a way to integrate this conversation, whatever it would be moving forward. And I think, the discussion that we wound up with was kind of this mixed support, if you will. We had a definite more people voting for changing the start times than people voting against changing the start times, but also a pretty strong minority report. And I think there's going to be some more discussion on that I would recommend that happens when it comes time to change the high school schedule, whatever that might look like, so that those things would be incorporated together if a change was going to be made. And I think at this point, my recollection was that we hadn't necessarily even come to a consensus on what that move was going to be at our presentation, and we would like some very strong guidance when it comes to time for that discussion to get fired back up. But I would ask that we align it to some implementation model with the 22-23 school year, so that any decisions we made on the scheduling for the high schools would correspond with this, whatever that might be, which could include we do nothing, we change it dramatically, or we do something small, whatever those decisions are.
One thing when that does happen that I would like to see some data on between now and then would be what late start date time might look like during the week when what's the word I'm searching for, when we've moved late start to Wednesdays for this year, if we move it back. But I'd like to have families weigh in on that to know what works best. I know we're working from what works best for the teachers and stuff, but I'd like families to weigh in on, does that work for families? What does it do to the younger kids and that type of thing? I'm not saying that very well, but Dr. Cook, maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, make sure I know what you're asking for. We used to have late start Mondays, and then the pandemic hit, and we decided that just for some consistency for parents to be able to plan and figure this out, whether we were in yellow or in orange, we were going to make Wednesday be the day that was the impacted at home day. And now what I'm hearing you say is you'd like to get some feedback from families on whether or not that's a good move or a not so good move. And I would predict that families will say, no late start would be a much more a more well-received solution, but I'm not sure our administrators and our teachers would agree with that. So I think we would be very open, if that's what you're asking for, we'd be very opening to collecting that feedback and trying to figure out what might be the best solution going forward. And not just when, but what's being done in that time too as well, just to make sure that that time is being maximized and useful. And I think the set of questions that we would want to know the answers to from our families, we would also have a set of questions we'd want to know from our teachers and our administrators, how that might look.
Thanks for summarizing that as we go later on here, but that's exactly what I'd like to see, just so our families understand the importance of that time for us as a district, but also so that on the district side we understand how does that impact a family's schedule during the week, and the changes and the things that throws. What kind of wrenches does it tend to throw in working families' lives?
Well, I appreciated Trustee May asking Kelly about the late start, because I was interested where you sat on that. And I'm, when you said hard pause, I sucked in my breath, because I was on, I participated in that committee, and it's pretty close to me, but I didn't get after the follow-up of implementing it in the same year. So to the extent that the administration thinks that pausing it for a year and then looking at it next year would still allow for implementation into the 22-23 year, then I would be supportive of that. I wouldn't like dropping it for a year and not being able to consider or look at having a global, and I like this idea that 2023 is going to be a big year, but if you got to have change, you just as well take it all at once and rip the Band-Aid off and go from there, right?
Yeah, I agree with Joan saying, this committee did a lot of work, and you were, our board liaison for that, and so I want to recognize the work that they did, and thank you, Seth, for all your hard work on this committee. It seems as though, Dr. Cook, you mentioned the minority report, and if I remember it correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that was more from staff potentially and teachers worrying about the logistics and sports and how it affected that. But it seemed as though the community and parents were very resolute in their opinion that a late start, whatever time it would end up being, was in the best interest of our students' mental health and performance and academic achievement. So I was curious too about your comment, the hard stop. Was it that we go back and start all this work over? Because that gave me a little bit of pause, because so much work was done and the process was lengthy. Or do we just wait to implement it till we make some scheduling changes, which seems like the best time, since both high schools start at different times right now anyway. So
sorry, Dr. Cook. Some of the challenge there too was around timing. The timing of that minority report happened in June, actually after COVID-19 closures had happened. But if you might recall, the community survey we did went out in February before those closures had happened. And so that definitely probably complicated some of the feedback that we received, both from the community as well as in the minority report.
Yeah, it seems like some of the minority report was around, hey, this is going to be a crazy year next year anyways, and let's, not add to that. But I think that was maybe the most troubling part of that, whole thing, is that we kind of had, it was pretty clear lines, right? That for the most part, school staff, whether it be administrations or teachers, were kind of in one group, and parents were in another, community members were in another. I don't know if there's more to be fleshed out there or not, given that we have more time, and was it just, okay, we were under a need to make a recommendation to the board because this is the deadline they gave us, and so it was kind of, all right, we need to do something, and so that was a recommendation. It got enough votes to pass, but with more time, could there be more discussion to maybe find some common ground and look at some of those issues, like, okay, we can solve these, but we can't solve these, or what if we did this instead of that? And
well, but my recollection was actually one of the options Seth gave the whole committee was, we need more time. And that was not what the committee decided to do. They were ready to take a vote, and they had done Seth had done some preliminary, survey of where do you fall on this. What I recall being a distinction wasn't so much this division of, a close minority and majority, but people who weren't necessarily in support of the flip that was adopted as the primary idea, but still in support of a pushing secondary start times later. And so my recollection, and Seth can correct me if I'm wrong, is that there was more of a majority for the idea of pushing secondary times back and starting kids later than really was reflected in the overall vote, because there was not consensus on what would that look like. And that's the piece I think needs to be vetted a little bit more by, those stakeholders potentially again, or admin in some way to vet out what is the best plan for pushing the later start for secondary and not necessarily a flip. But I feel pretty strongly that committee worked and did what it needed to do, and there was a majority. And then in addition to that, there was an even larger portion than just the majority that just didn't vote in favor because they weren't in favor of the schedule that was proposed.
So is it possible, as Kelly, as you do your work, to build out that bell schedule, that we build in a later time for high school at that point, and we just build that in as you begin to give us options for what the bell schedule is going to look like? I mean, that, I hope you guys are right.
It's definitely, and I think sports was also an issue, so we'll have to consider it. Well, sports was an issue as well, and so we'll have to be really considerate of time and the impact of practice and away games in a way that doesn't deter from academic access and a schedule. I feel confident that we can do some really important and significant things around that, but I do know that that was also an issue around the late start time. So yes, we will incorporate it. Yes, science would suggest that it's better for our adolescent brains to start much later in the learning process, and we will also not make our transportation department mad because they're wonderful people who do great work. So.
And I will put your magic wand in the mail, and you'll be getting that shortly.
Yes. It's out there. We'll figure it out.
I think if one thing has happened during this whole time of COVID, we know how creative we can be, and we are capable of lots of things. And so I just recognize how the burden all of this places on all of you. But
Yeah, if we can shut down school and then we can open it up in hybrid, we can move our late start, we can probably push back secondary start times and people will get there.
And we can feed kids.
Okay. Oh, we made it through that. Thanks, Seth. All right, policies for information. I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time on these. The first two policies, 3012 and 3012P, and then 9810, we've talked about these forever. A lot of things on here we've talked about forever tonight, where we're kind of cleaning up some things that got backburnered. And I believe last time we talked about these policies, we had pretty much agreement around wording, I think, amongst us as a board. But we wanted to wait to get school in session so we could roll these out in our more formal process here of opening them up for 30 days public comment. So that's really why they're here, is that even though we've taken lots of public comment along the way on these and had workshops and done all sorts of things, this would be starting the 30-day public comment period on these two policies, and they would be back for action in November if that's what the board so chooses. And then the other two policies, 5340 and 6320, are on there due to some requirements from the state.
I would like the opportunity to just give a shout out to Annie Harris from Lions on O'Dowd. She's on, by the way, in case we had questions for her. She's the architect of this, these different options and versions, and she has listened to us whine and cry about how difficult this has been for months and months and months. And I just want you all to know that she has been such a trooper and a great team player and helped us create something that I think we're going to be able to have at least a really good opportunity to get some positive feedback and maybe some interesting comments from the community. We feel like we've found something that is a solution with these, and we look forward to both your guys' input and the community's input. And just a quick shout out to her. She did amazing work in getting it to this point.
My only thought, well, I'll start by saying yes, thank you, Annie, is I don't know how we typically roll these out for public comment. Do we just post it and say, give us a comment? Because I think it can be very confusing if it's not explained that these are options that the district is looking at. And because, you've got the one that says recommended, but are people going to understand that that's the one that admin is recommending and the board may be leaning towards, but these are other options? Because I don't think we've ever rolled out a policy like that before. And so I'm just really concerned about the delivery and how people may or may not understand what they're reading and how to comment on it.
So typically we would take whatever's redlined and clean it up and send it out with that evident to the public. And I would suggest in this case, we've got some options. One of them being we could just send it out as the recommended and say, here were other options that were considered. This is the one that we would be likely to consider. And so there's a clear delineation on the things that we did consider. The other option we could do is to just not send out the other options at all and just say, this is the one that after some deliberation we decided were the most effective to these. I think either one of those would be fine. And I do think if we do send out the other options that were considered, that we clearly articulate that they're separate now and would be different than the way the policy is currently written.
Yeah, and on that end, with the recommended policy, I still have a little bit of concern over requiring application processes for our magnet schools that we're not employing or utilizing for our open enrollment policies. And is that equitable in a sense? Because this is different than we've ever done before. And so we do have, for instance, Dalton typically has many spots open for or available for open enrollment. We know their SES is even lower than our magnet schools. Do they need to require those open enrollment slots to go? So I know I had mentioned that last time we talked about this and we haven't had a chance to reconsider it, but it does seem like we're asking more in this policy of 2 schools than we're asking for all of our
Yeah, I think that is a critical point, and I'm very attuned to that statement, Trustee May. I would tell you that one difference that is a fairly substantial delineation between the differences is with our new open enrollment policy, and this you can always go home, if you will. There's really no guarantees when you're open enrolled. Whereas in a magnet school, if you wish to make that your home school, once you're in, you're in, and nothing can happen to take that away from you once you're in. And so when you open enroll to one of our schools, if enough students that live in that zone choose to go to that school, they can quickly bump you out. Now we're going to try to work with families to make sure that that's done in a way that isn't a major disruption, but we've changed that. Even as much as this year, we've started to change that dialogue that there are no more this once you're in, you're always in into a neighborhood school, because home families take precedence. And so while I agree wholeheartedly with the premise of what you're saying, I'm not sure it's the exact same environment because of those differences.
Yeah, that's fair. I hadn't considered that, and I'm glad to hear that you guys have changed how that policy is now being applied or utilized, because I think in the past it was a little bit different. And so maybe you're right, the improvement of our open enrollment policy will take care of that situation occurring. So thank you for reminding me of that.
I guess I'm concerned, maybe what Ms. Brumley said, just the way we roll this out, that it could be a little confusing. I think based on the much of the feedback we've received along the way, and I think the way this policy has massaged over time, that I would maybe support us kind of picking a model, and that's what goes out for comment. I would be in support of the recommended model because I think it does two things. One, it honors kind of that priority zone that was really important to those schools, and kind of creating a home base for those schools. But it also recognizes that the schools are challenging to serve some families, right? Because of the way transportation was, and this kind of shifts that model a little bit and gives some priority to students who maybe didn't have the wherewithal to get in there before, whether it be time or energy or resources, those sorts of things. So I would be in support of the recommended model, and that's what be put out for public comment. Because I think we've had lots of comment on the other, as we've talked about this policy for maybe 12 months, or this concept.
And I didn't know that was an option until Dr. Cook said that, so I agree with that.
And I think, especially given that the recommendation has come from both principals and those deeply involved in that, even more so with their eyes, I appreciated at the end of that, of the whole policy, just their recommendations and whys behind it, especially as this comes back to us, given some time. So I really appreciate their work and effort and their eyes on this. So I'd be in favor of just rolling out what's been recommended and going from there.
I would also be in favor of that.
All right, so it sounds like we're in agreement on that. So on posting of the policies, we'll post the recommended version on the magnet school policies there, and that'll be open for public comment for at least the next 30 days. And back for potential action in November. Yes.
Thank you for hanging with us tonight, Annie. Appreciate your dedication.
No, thank you. Thank you for the kind words. It's been a lot of collaboration from a lot of people on these. So I just hope that this recommended one, we can get some good feedback on it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Annie. Okay. Any questions on the other two policies that had the changes? Okay. Board reports. I know Trustee Smith, you wanted to just mention long-range planning.
Yeah, just that long-range planning did meet, and they are, especially because it is a board committee, looking to us as a board for what's their task this year. We just came up last year, approved the long-range plan, so what's this year about? And so looking for some guidance from us and direction, really for this year of what do we need from them, and what are the things that they could be tasked with to begin to move and drive us forward this coming year.
And when is long-range planning to?
Yeah, the next long range, but it would be at the end of the month, the last Monday of the month, I believe. Yeah, and so over the next couple weeks, just getting some feedback, at our upcoming meetings or whenever that's best and appropriate would be important to drive.
October 26th is their next meeting.
I just wonder if you working with perhaps Trustee May or Dr. Cook and their board chair could kind of come up with some ideas and bring it back to the board, and hey, this is what we're thinking, or we could go this direction or that direction. That may be a more informed conversation on our part instead of just off the cuff trying to come up with that. It's again, it's a strange year, and just to. We don't. I'd hate to see them working just to work, right? And I think it is important that we direct their work this year. But I think we probably need to put a little more thought into that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think with enrollments being in flux this year, it makes it more difficult for them, even if they wanted to look at their recommendation and, revise it. It would be difficult this year, especially even day touring schools. The portable usage is down. I mean, things have changed definitely since last year. In the past, there was an addition to the bylaws that allowed long-range planning to assist with levies and bonds, and as we pivot towards spring, they would be a great committee to kind of be the groundwork for updates on what our levy might look like potentially, even just being in aware of what is happening. But for the short term, I think it's difficult. I know in years past, especially the year after we passed the bond, long-range planning kind of had a quiet year also, and they were able to kind of retool their recommendation from prior years. But even that this year is different because the recommendation would be different. I don't know that it would be as pertinent and relevant with things in such a state of flux. So I'd be happy to meet and kind of go through what we've done in the past and offer any guidance.
And maybe we can bring that back on our meeting on the 19th as just kind of a brief item just to solidify that with some direction. And then that would be ahead of your meeting. That's the following Monday. Okay. Thank you. I think that's it for board reports as far as committees that have met. So, okay. We've got, as we've kind of continued, we have workshops scheduled the next 2 Mondays. We'll solidify agendas and times and all that for those and get that information out shortly. So there's nothing further. A meeting adjourns. Thanks for sticking with us tonight, and we'll see you all soon.